Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 1 of our story. If you like this what if story and want to see part 2, let me know in the comments below. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Also, check the description for more great content and my playlist. This story was posted by 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴 on Wattpad. Now let's start. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴 sat at his desk, his eyes feeling heavier than lead as the lecturer droned on. His training session with Dabi and Toga had drained him. His bloodshot eyes had lost their shine, and dark bags lingered beneath them, concealed with makeup. Finally, the lecturer finished, thanking everyone for watching his video. 𝐒𝐮 slammed his laptop shut, removed his earphones, and trudged out of the library corner he had claimed for its excellent Wi-Fi. He had been taking online junior high school classes over the summer to catch up. Rushing to his dorm, he locked the door behind him. He placed his bag on the desk, opened his books, and took out a peculiar device. He activated his smart pen, which began to write down answers to his homework in his handwriting. While the pen worked, 𝐒𝐮 prepared for his real task. He slipped into a pair of black dress briefs, a crisp white dress shirt, and a fitted dark green blazer. After combing back his hair and washing his face, he removed all traces of makeup. This was his formal villain outfit, and tonight was significant. He was heading to a meeting with 𝐒𝐿 and his superior to discuss the next steps toward a revolution. 𝐒𝐮 was the next up-and-coming leader of the League of Villains. After 3 years with the League, he had recently been nominated as the next leader, with only Shigaraki as his competitor, a challenge he was confident he would win. He smirked as he jumped out of the window, leaping down the branches of a tree and slipping into the shadows, unnoticed, or so he thought. He stared down at a small, crumpled piece of paper for a moment before checking it against the address on the business card he had received. Following the directions had led him to the upscale part of town, which was unusual. Meetings typically took place in dingy bars or warehouses. Blaze Corporation, he whispered in awe. Whoever 𝐒𝐿 superior was, they must be incredibly powerful. At the secretary's desk, he tapped the bell for service. The secretary's cold gaze quickly shifted to forced cheerfulness. She questioned what he was doing in such a place, her eyes flashing with a hint of hostility. 𝐒𝐮 rolled his eyes and showed her his VIP card and the formal invitation he had received via email. Realizing her mistake, she hurriedly apologized and signaled a guard to escort him to the meeting. They exited the carpeted elevator onto the top floor, the penthouse. The spacious room had dark tiled floors that reflected his image. Shelves filled with books and files lined the back wall, and decorative weapons hung above them. A purple fire flickered in the grand marble fireplace, casting an eerie glow that sent a shiver down his spine. The room exuded an air of superiority and danger, and he felt a thrill of excitement. At the medieval-styled table in the center sat the head of this operation, someone even more powerful than 𝐒𝐿 himself, the #1 villain in Japan, possibly the world. 𝐒𝐮, my boy, hope you're doing well. Please take a seat, his father commanded, struggling to mask his emotions. The longing to embrace his son and apologize for his absence was palpable. 𝐒𝐮 was in shock. He had thought his father was still in prison. How had he escaped? Why was he here? And why was he 𝐒𝐿 superior? His father had never been a villain, just someone who had faced unfortunate circumstances. Not meaning to interrupt your thoughts, but we need to start this meeting, his father said, the sound echoing in his chest like it did when he teased 𝐒𝐮 and his mother. 𝐒𝐮 nodded, pushing down his swirling emotions. Now, 𝐒𝐮, you are our undercover agent who has just been accepted into UA to gather information on the teachers, heroes, and students, his father affirmed. 𝐒𝐮 nodded, feeling the weight of the task ahead. How far have you gotten in collecting the required information? His father asked. 𝐒𝐮 placed his completed hero analysis notebooks on the table with pride. His father picked one up, flipping through it with a satisfied smile. You gathered all of this despite everything, he whispered. 𝐒𝐮, his father said gravely, breaking the silence, it's time to explain your actual assignment. It won't be simple, and if handled recklessly, it could end very messily. This caught 𝐒𝐮's attention. It sounded like a challenge, an opportunity to fight, a chance for vengeance. You are to lead and plan the takedown of 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲. You will coordinate and plan the attacks. It is imperative that you stay undercover and vigilant. Do not get caught, or the consequences will be dire. All for One spoke for the first time that evening, his voice soft and strained from past injuries. Essentially, destroy the school and bring their precious image to ruin. The fire in the grate flared, and a low rumble echoed through the room, intensifying the atmosphere of danger. My dad lightened the mood with a joke, and the heavy atmosphere around him dissipated. He explained that this would be my final test to determine if I was fit to lead the league. The thought of it being an act of war filled me with dread. I couldn't fail. If I did, Shigaraki would take my place, and we would all be in danger. I looked down, my fists clenched tightly. Destroying 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲. I felt a whirlwind of emotions: nervousness, excitement, fear, guilt. I couldn't help but think about my mother. She was gone, taken by those heroes, and I wondered what she would think of my choices. I mumbled to myself that I believed the plan could work. My dad emphasized the weight of this responsibility, explaining that it would be the first step in our revolt against society and the heroes, whom he regarded with disdain. He described how they saw the world in black and white, discarding anyone who didn't fit into their narrow definitions of good and evil. His passion burned brightly as he declared that this had to change. Determination surged within me, and I assured him that I would do it. My dad smiled proudly, and All for One nodded from behind the screen. He reminded me that while at work, I needed to call him Lucifer, his alias, and I would have one too. I struggled to remember what it was until it finally came to me: Reaper. It suited my past well. It was time to show the world what we could do. Change was coming, and people would see the complexities beyond their black and white views. The revolution began today. The night before, after discussing my new quirk, I left the adults to strategize for war. I wasn't allowed to eavesdrop to avoid revealing their secrets. Lucifer had given me his contact information and a couple of burner phones. It was surreal to think that my dad was one of Japan's most feared villains, and no one suspected that Hisashi Midoriya was Lucifer, the king of the criminal underworld. He had even arranged for a clone to fake his death. I settled at my desk, pulling out a notebook labeled Hero Analysis Number 16. Although I had been at the school for a week, we hadn't started classes yet. This week was for settling into our dorms and orientation. Tomorrow, the real fun would begin. As I lay on my bed, I took in my surroundings. My bedding was black with gray geometric designs, and opposite my bed was a metal desk with my computer and notebooks on the shelves above. My training equipment, clothes, and weapons were stored in a plain white closet, which I planned to paint gray. My personal style had evolved significantly. My room used to be filled with All Might memorabilia, but I had sold it all years ago. The only remnants of my childhood collection were some old comic books and a Batman bobblehead. I walked to Class 1A and paused outside the futuristic classroom, notebook in hand. With a sigh, I pushed open the large door, hoping not to be here for more than a year. Inside, I was immediately met with noise. The boy who had yelled at me during the entrance exams was now arguing with my childhood friend and bully, 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴. A group of girls chatted happily in a corner, while a boy with a purple bobblehead watched them intently. I quietly entered the room and spotted a familiar-looking boy with glasses. Activating my original quirk, Analyst, I gathered information about him. His name was Tenya Ida, from a renowned hero family. His quirk, Engine, enhanced his speed and strength, making him a formidable opponent in close combat. I noted his weaknesses, realizing that if I wanted to defeat him, I could use fizzy drinks to stall his abilities or find a long-range fighter to distract him. As I finished jotting down my observations, the brown-haired girl I had saved during the entrance exam approached me, overflowing with gratitude. I played along, commenting on how impressive the school was and downplaying my role in her rescue. I was maintaining the facade of a kind, friendly, and somewhat awkward fanboy who aspired to be a hero, despite the doubts of others. It was exhausting to keep up the act, and I longed to escape the pressure of it all. A voice interrupted my thoughts, declaring that if I was there to make friends, I could leave. Everyone turned to see a giant yellow caterpillar in the doorway, which turned out to be their teacher in a sleeping bag. Mr. 𝐒𝐻𝐬𝐽, their homeroom teacher, instructed them to put on their PE kits and meet him outside. Groans filled the air at the thought of physical activity on the first day. He warned them that complaining would lead to suspension, prompting everyone to hurry to the changing rooms. One student, determined to keep a low profile, quickly changed before anyone else arrived, wanting to maintain their carefully crafted image. They stood impatiently on the sports field until Mr. 𝐒𝐻𝐬𝐽 finally emerged. He stood before them, his gaze landing on one student in particular. Midoriya had achieved the highest score in the entrance exam, and Mr. 𝐒𝐻𝐬𝐽 wanted to know his best softball throw from junior high. Midoriya stuttered out his answer, already aware that they were about to undergo a fitness test, where failure to meet standards could lead to expulsion. It was a harsh reality of their world. Mr. 𝐒𝐻𝐬𝐽 handed him the softball and directed him to stand in the circle. He explained that schools were trying to standardize everything, but in an era of quirks, it was pointless. He encouraged Midoriya to use his quirk to throw the ball with full power, challenging him to show what he could do. Midoriya smirked inwardly, wondering if Mr. 𝐒𝐻𝐬𝐽 even knew what his quirk was. He glanced at Bakugo, who was visibly frustrated, likely because Midoriya had outperformed him for once. Activating his original quirk, Midoriya gauged how to throw the ball and estimated his score. Then he activated Dash, feeling green energy envelop him like a wave. He leaned back and launched himself into the air, using only 70% of his strength to avoid causing damage to the surroundings or himself. The ball soared through the air, disappearing into the sky. Turning around, he smiled nervously, a smile he had practiced, which widened when he saw his score. 780 meters. The class erupted in shock. Midoriya turned to Mr. 𝐒𝐻𝐬𝐽, who seemed lost in thought but quickly snapped back to reality. Mr. 𝐒𝐻𝐬𝐽 announced that they would be doing a fitness test to assess their ability to handle training. A pink-skinned girl interrupted, expressing her excitement, which prompted Midoriya to facepalm. Mr. 𝐒𝐻𝐬𝐽's response was a chilling reminder of the stakes. Whoever came last would face expulsion. His smile had an unsettling edge, making him seem almost villainous. The fitness tests began. Midoriya finished third in the 50-meter sprint with a time of 4:50 seconds, achieved a grip test of 105 kilograms, and participated in various other activities, including a long jump and a long-distance run. One girl, 𝗬𝗓𝗏, impressed everyone by achieving an infinite score in the ball throw. She was the one he had saved during the entrance exams. The final results revealed Todoroki in first place, Momo in second, and Bakugo in third, with Midoriya placing sixth. He had intentionally held back during the tests to avoid drawing too much attention. As Mr. 𝐒𝐻𝐬𝐽 announced that 𝗬𝐻𝐽 had come last and would face expulsion, 𝗬𝗓𝗏 protested, arguing that it was unfair to expel someone on the first day. Mr. 𝐒𝐻𝐽, frustrated, explained that being a hero was tough and dangerous, and it was better to learn early if one was not suited for it. He reassured them that no one would be expelled. It was a tactic to motivate them. He also recognized 𝗬𝐻𝐽's potential as a stealth hero, which surprised everyone. Momo commented that she had known all along that no one would be expelled, but Midoriya felt compelled to speak up. He expressed that Mr. 𝐒𝐻𝐽 would have expelled 𝗬𝐻𝐽 if he believed she lacked potential, emphasizing the dangers of being a hero. He handed the conversation back to Mr. 𝐒𝐻𝐽, who acknowledged Midoriya's words with a bored yet slightly impressed expression. After the tests, Midoriya headed to the changing rooms. As he was getting dressed, Kaminari approached him, introducing himself. Just as they were about to converse further, Bakugo's furious voice echoed through the room, calling for Midoriya. He braced himself for a confrontation, preparing to play his role as the timid nerd. When Bakugo confronted him, demanding to know how a quirkless nobody like him had achieved such success, Midoriya trembled slightly, stuttering as he responded. Bakugo's anger was palpable, but before things escalated further, a red-haired student rushed in and managed to pull Bakugo away, calming him down. Izuku felt a burning curiosity about the secret that lay behind the rumors surrounding him. As he adjusted his tie, Kaminari asked if it was true that he was quirkless. Izuku found the question rather foolish. He explained that he had always possessed a quirk but had chosen not to showcase it, especially since it had been weak and developed later than most. Kaminari nodded and moved on to chat with 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽, who had a unique quirk that allowed him to produce tape. Izuku was among the last to change, with a red and white-haired boy named Todoroki exiting before him. The look in Todoroki's eyes suggested he shared Izuku's longing to avoid awkward questions and conversations. As Aizawa observed Izuku walking back to the dorms, he was plagued by questions about the green-haired boy, particularly why he couldn't erase Izuku's quirk. The atmosphere felt cold and unsettling. In a different world, chaos reigned. The air was thick with a foul stench, a mix of decay and despair. The sounds of an excited crowd drowned out the cries of those who suffered in the gladiator ring, where survival was the only goal. Izuku found himself in a cage, waiting for his turn to entertain the crowd and secure another day of life. At just 13, he was the longest surviving member of his age group, and his quirk was not suited for combat, making each match a perilous challenge. Stepping into the ring, he faced a girl who was slightly older and had only been there for 2 weeks. She had won a handful of matches, while Izuku, known as the Soul Starer, boasted an impressive record of 159 wins. The buzzer sounded, and the crowd erupted with excitement. Izuku approached his opponent with determination, never toying with them, always aiming for a swift victory. The audience reveled in his matches, and he fought daily to appease their whims, knowing their favor was crucial for his survival. Suddenly he was engulfed in darkness, transported to a scene outside a burning hospital. He felt immobilized as if trapped in a nightmare. He was then dragged away to a dilapidated foster home, a place he had never been allowed to visit before. Memories of his mother flooded back, reminding him of happier times, like his birthday celebration filled with laughter and joy. In a flash, he found himself in a moment of panic, witnessing a girl with white hair and green eyes in distress. She wore tattered cat ears and an oversized sweater, and her cries pierced through him, but he was powerless to help her, bound by invisible chains. Izuku jolted awake, drenched in sweat and trembling. Nightmares haunted him, and he despised them. Glancing at the clock, he noted it was only 4 a.m., leaving him with just a few hours of sleep. He knew he had to train, so he moved to the punching bag in his room, slipping into a trance as he practiced his moves, finding solace in the rhythm of his training. When his alarm rang at 7 a.m., he felt surprisingly refreshed, despite the sweat clinging to him. After a quick shower and applying concealing cream to his scars, he dressed in a skin-colored undershirt that masked his imperfections. Following a simple breakfast, he left the building as others began to wake. Reviewing the day's schedule, he noted a heroics lesson at the end of the day, taught by the very man who had shattered his dreams. All Might's words echoed in his mind, reminding him of the moment he had lost hope of becoming a hero. The thought of confronting All Might and Bakugo filled him with frustration. The day dragged on until lunch, when he hurried to submit his report. He rushed to the roof, using his burner phone to inform Shigaraki that everything was proceeding as planned. The first phase of their scheme was underway, with more phases to follow, aimed at dismantling Yui and other hero schools by year's end. Finally, the day concluded, and it was time for heroics. Excitement bubbled within him at the prospect of sparring, as it had been far too long since he had the chance to engage in combat. Uraraka noticed his enthusiasm and commented on it, playfully calling him Deku, a name that only Bakugo used. Izuku felt a mix of surprise and annoyance, realizing how little she knew about him. Didn't she hear his name being called out or pay any attention at all? Izuku Midoriya introduced himself, requesting to be called Izuku instead of Deku, which was an insult from Kaken. He explained this with a crooked smile, feeling annoyed by his own pretend stutter. The girl beamed at him, saying that Deku sounded cute and suited him, which made him feel insulted despite her cheerful demeanor. Izuku held his breath to appear flustered as she smiled brightly and latched onto his arm, happily chatting away. Internally, he screamed for her to give him some space. Just then, All Might dramatically announced his arrival, striking a pose in the doorway. Everyone except Izuku was buzzing about All Might's coolness. He forced a smile and closed his eyes tightly to avoid looking at him. All Might instructed everyone to suit up in their new hero costumes and meet him at Ground Omega, gesturing to a large trolley stacked with metal suitcases. While most rushed to grab theirs, 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 and a few others took their time, making their way to the changing rooms. In the changing room, 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 carefully took out his hero costume from its silver suitcase and admired the craftsmanship. His costume consisted of army green cargo briefs, a fitted black shirt, an olive green jacket with a detachable hood, a copper dog tag, and a utility belt filled with tools, a first aid kit, and snacks. The final touch was a metal mouth cover for protection and sleek black leather boots designed for stealth. The suit was made from a special cotton that was waterproof, fire-resistant, and capable of absorbing or reflecting heat, making it incredibly functional. Once dressed, he marveled at how easy it was to move in. The dog tag contained all the information he had collected over the years, a high-tech piece he had designed himself, filling him with pride. As he stepped out, an awkward silence enveloped the room. His classmates were taken aback, questioning who this new person was. Kirishima hesitantly called out his name, unsure if he was correct. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 stepped into the light, smiling brightly, and their questions faded away, replaced by the resumption of casual chatter. Uraraka approached him in her tight suit, causing him to blush. She complained about how snug it was and asked about his costume, to which he lied, claiming inspiration from an old American comic book, The Green Arrow. All Might then announced that they would be engaging in one-on-one combat to assess their skills, adding a competitive twist. Excited yells and groans filled the air as he announced the matches. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽's heart raced when he finally heard his name. 𝐒𝐿 Midoriya against Katsuki Bakugo, All Might declared. Bakugo yelled, eager to prove himself, still upset about something 𝐒𝐮𝐽 couldn't quite recall. As the matches progressed, 𝐒𝐮𝐽 walked to the arena, overhearing whispers from his classmates. They expressed concern for him, predicting he would be overwhelmed. Anger simmered within him. They were already assuming the outcome. He reminded himself to maintain his undercover persona, even if it meant losing. He calmed himself and took a basic fighting stance, waiting for the starting signal. With the sound of the gong, Bakugo launched an explosion toward him. 𝐒𝐮𝐽 dropped to the floor and rolled to dodge, narrowly avoiding several more blasts that singed his hair. He continued to evade Bakugo's attacks, knowing the strength of his opponent. Finally, he created a smoke screen, preparing to counterattack. Silently, he slipped through the smoke and struck Bakugo in the chest before darting away, enjoying the thrill of the hit-and-run tactic. Bakugo, in contrast, was more of a brute force fighter, giving 𝐒𝐮𝐽 an advantage. He attempted an axe kick, but Bakugo rolled away and countered, trying to throw him to the ground. 𝐒𝐮𝐽 landed on his feet and bounced back, activating his analyst ability to search for weaknesses. However, Bakugo grabbed him by his shirt and flung him toward a wall, but 𝐒𝐮𝐽 quickly recovered. Frustrated, Bakugo resorted to trash talk. He taunted 𝐒𝐮𝐽, insisting he would never become a hero. 𝐒𝐮𝐽 responded with a chilling smile, landing a punch that knocked the wind out of Bakugo. As Bakugo swung back, 𝐒𝐮𝐽 leaped over him, showcasing impressive agility. Bakugo boasted about his superiority, but 𝐒𝐮𝐽 shot back, claiming he hadn't even been scratched yet. Though not entirely true, he refused to let Bakugo gain the upper hand. The battle continued, each fighter determined to prove their strength. He pulled the pin from his left gauntlet and grabbed onto the shirt before the other could twist away. A massive explosion erupted, and if it weren't for the suit, the heat would have scorched the skin off his back. Now, the suit had a significant hole in it, and he would make sure the one responsible would pay for that. The crowd erupted in screams and cries, filled with fear and concern, but he gradually stood back up, ready to launch a counterattack. However, neither he nor Bakugo could move. All Might's voice boomed, warning Bakugo that if he acted again, there would be severe consequences, emphasizing that such actions could have been fatal. He slammed the buzzer, releasing the two heroes in training, but Midoriya remained frozen, as if 𝐒𝐻 had been flipped. Thoughts raced through his mind, urging him to fight, to win, to survive. He stood motionless, transformed from a hero into a gladiator, a fighter. Just as Bakugo prepared to strike, Midoriya changed. He seized Bakugo's hand in a powerful grip, causing the blonde to scream in pain. Midoriya's gaze was icy, devoid of warmth, his eyes glazed over and unfeeling. For the first time, Bakugo felt genuine fear, ironically directed at the boy he had bullied. Midoriya was in a trance, showing no emotion as he viewed Bakugo as just another opponent. He hurled Bakugo against the wall, leaving a dent in the metal surface. In a blur of green and red, he leaped toward Bakugo, his landing cracking the ground beneath him as he moved in for the decisive blow. Grabbing Bakugo by the hair, he slammed him to the ground with a force that echoed throughout the training room. The entire class was in shock. Their once timid classmate was overpowering one of the strongest students effortlessly. Momo, trembling, wondered if Midoriya was under some form of control. Kirishima shouted for All Might to intervene, and the others nodded in agreement as Midoriya continued to P&D Bakugo into the ground, who could barely stand. All Might urgently commanded Midoriya to stop, fearing for Bakugo's life. But Midoriya was lost in his own world, where it was a fight for survival. Realizing the situation was escalating, All Might rushed in, positioning himself between the two. When Midoriya looked up, All Might was taken aback by the emptiness in his eyes. A buzzer sounded, signaling the end of the match. Midoriya's glazed expression vanished, and he fainted in All Might's arms. Recovery Girl arrived, taking both boys to the clinic on stretchers, muttering about powerful students and careless teachers. Later that day, Mr. Aizawa and All Might sat in the clinic, observing Midoriya. The principal had been informed of the intense training incident but was unable to visit. The teachers examined the scars and curious tattoos that adorned the small boy's body. Some scars were small and clean, possibly self-inflicted, while others were jagged and broad, with discolored patches covering much of his back. Their thoughts were unanimous. What had happened? Waking up was always abrupt for him, like a SW being flipped. As his eyes opened, his mind raced to comprehend the situation. Recovery Girl had seen his body and called for help. Now, they were waiting for him to regain consciousness. He reminded himself to stay still and not alert anyone to his awakening. It was late at night, and he could remain calm. Stretching and yawning, he sat up to assess his injuries. Nothing seemed too serious. Recovery Girl had done her job well. Now, he needed a plausible cover story. He considered claiming he had been abused by his foster parents, using the tattoos to hide the scars. But that felt too cliché. Perhaps he could say he had been in an accident involving a collapsed building or a fire, and the tattoos were a way to conceal the scars. That could work, as such incidents were common in the 𝗏𝗏𝗏 township. He could attribute the newer bruises and scars to intense training, which they might have seen before, along with quirk overuse or bullying. It was a solid plan, and if they asked for details about the accident, he could blame it on trauma-induced amnesia, expressing a longing to forget the traumatic event. If they inquired about medical records, he could say his foster parents should have them, though he doubted they had kept any. He had addressed the appearance issue, but how could he explain his fighting style without revealing too much? Everyone must have been frightened. Perhaps he could use that to his advantage. He considered the possibility of memory alterations with all-for-one special equipment, though he doubted he could obtain it. Maybe one of the underlings had a memory-altering quirk. That was Plan A, but if it failed, Plan B would involve crafting a believable explanation that portrayed him as a victim. He wouldn't be able to initiate Plan A immediately, so Plan B needed to be effective. He pondered claiming it was a result of one of his foster parents' quirks, perhaps one that altered a person's mindset or involved permanent brainwashing. However, that could lead the heroes to investigate and question his foster parents, which he wanted to avoid. Maybe hypnosis could work instead. Yes, that could work. One of the people at the foster home I was sent to could have hypnotized me and made me react to a buzzer. It seemed a bit far-fetched, but it would have to do. A voice echoed from the corner of the room, suggesting that I could pretend to have no idea what they were talking about. Despite my body's protests, I jumped to my feet and saw my dad lounging in one of the uncomfortable clinic chairs. That idea could work, I thought, feeling an embarrassed blush creep up my neck. After a moment of silence, he commented idly that he hoped my actual foster parents weren't that terrible. I realized I had been muttering again. I really needed to curb that habit. There had been good days and bad days, I admitted, more of the latter. Looking down at the floor, I felt disgust and shame as memories flooded back. He asked if I had told anyone about my experiences, his voice stiff with cold anger. It was unclear whether his frustration was directed at himself or the world. Gritting my teeth, I growled that I had told people, but who would believe a useless, misfit villain child? No one. My blood boiled as I recalled the times I had cried out for help, yet no one came. I had been broken down and bullied, but no one would lift a finger because I was quirkless and, to those who knew, a villain's kid. 𝐒𝐮𝐲, for instance, knew about my dad being a villain. It was one of the reasons he believed I could never be a hero. He used that to his advantage, taking out all his frustrations on me, knowing I wouldn't fight back and that he wouldn't face any consequences. But I could tell he didn't truly understand or like what had happened to me. He was a coward who dared not speak out against the status quo. My dad expressed his sorrow for what I had gone through, wishing he had been there to protect me. He looked down in shame, then added that he was very proud of me. He began to tear up, but just as quickly as the door to his emotions opened, it closed. He acknowledged that the situation I was in was dire and that I could have blown my cover, but I had handled it well and crafted a story that positioned me as the victim. He offered a fake smile, speaking in his business tone. I explained that I was just following what 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 had taught me. If you tell a story that ties back to some truth, it becomes more believable. My stoic expression slipped into one of nostalgia as my dad smiled crookedly at me and ruffled my hair fondly. He warned me that there might be a problem with my classmates. They would fear and be suspicious of me. He advised me to act differently, to be overly kind and helpful, essentially becoming a stereotypical protagonist from a children's show. A bit of memory alteration wouldn't hurt either. He winked at me before turning to leave, stating he would contact someone to get moving. I hurriedly asked how he had gotten in. He explained that WeI's security was lacking and that with the skills and technology we had access to, it was decades behind the times. As one of 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽's portals opened, he assured me not to worry about the cameras. They hadn't seen anything. He also mentioned that we were planning to break into the school in a few days, advising me to redeem my reputation so I wouldn't be a suspect. The morning arrived in its usual pastel blues and oranges, and the confrontation went as well as I had anticipated. I told my well-rehearsed sob story about a tragic childhood accident that fueled my drive to become a hero, and the staff seemed to eat it up. None of them wanted to question this poor, fragile child, except for 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽, who probed me about the second half of my fight. I was certain that most of them thought a villain was behind my strange behavior, and I had provided evidence to support that theory. I stuttered about hearing a raspy voice in the back of my head before everything went dark. Slowly, the adults left the room, muttering in low voices about villains and checking security on the west side of the school. That wild goose chase would keep them occupied for a good while. With a worried expression, I asked Recovery Girl if 𝐒𝐻𝐿 was okay. She nodded sympathetically, and I let out a sigh of relief. Even though I hadn't been in control of myself, and it wouldn't really be my fault if he was injured, I couldn't bear the thought of him being hurt. He was still my best friend after all. I secretly basked in the surprised and worried look the nurse sent me when I mentioned holding my bully in such high regard. Despite Recovery Girl's protests, I attended our afternoon class to explain that I had not been in control of myself and that the heroes and teachers believed a villain was at work. I relished in the fearful looks that overtook some of their faces. They pitied me and were in awe of my situation. Some expressed concern, noting that I was a target for a villain so soon, while others looked skeptical, unsure if I was telling the truth. I whispered to myself that I could alter some memories that night as I walked back to my room. I threw myself into my chair and let out a deep sigh before straightening myself out and getting to work. I scheduled appointments with our brokers and looked into jobs we could do to secure more funding for the league. I also devised backup plans in case the current plan for the USJ attack didn't work. The break-in was happening on Tuesday, and today was Thursday. Plenty of time to perfect a few things and come up with plans B and C. After saving my work, I sent the plans to all for one and my father. Then I encrypted them and hid the evidence, ensuring that if anyone accessed my computer, all they would find was an overdone 6th grade report on the fox species and their habitat. Exactly at 11:35, I received a message from Lucifer that the underling with the mind-altering quirk had arrived. As soon as I finished reading the message, my burner phone rang. Reaper greeted me over the phone, and I responded in kind. I laid out my plans and specified who he was to target. A small, widespread alteration was necessary, and he seemed reassured by that thought. With their conversation concluded, he finished his task within the hour, and 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴 transported him away. It had truly been a long day. Exiting the classroom, he made his way to the computer room, where he planned to use the old laptop his father had left him to hack into the security cameras. As he ran through the plan in his mind, he paused to gaze out the window, reflecting on how surprisingly good the day had been. First, he had managed to get a good night's sleep, no nightmares, nothing. Second, the media had been gathering at the UE gates since early that morning, scheduled to arrive during lunch, but the sooner they came, the better. Third, they had engaged in a normal school activity, choosing class representatives. Momo had been elected vice president, and Ida had taken the role of president. While some were skeptical, he was a natural leader and deeply principled. The memory alterations had taken effect, becoming a new reality in the students' minds. As a result, they no longer avoided him as they once had. The changes seemed to have worked. The narrative had shifted to one where he and 𝐒𝐵𝐲𝐽 fought fiercely throughout the match, ultimately leading to 𝐒𝐵𝐲𝐽's victory. Still, the students remained cautious around him, as he had managed to hold his own against one of the class's best. He entered the library, heading to the secluded computer room where few ventured during lunch. Most students preferred the cafeteria. It was an unspoken rule that anyone who stayed in the library or computer room during lunch was considered odd. He didn't mind. The gates had opened, and the media was inside, along with Minakami, who possessed the water form quirk, allowing her to change her body into gas. The Nomu and Shigaraki were also present. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴 would use the ensuing confusion to conceal them and create a portal, enabling them to teleport the additional forces in the following day. Tomorrow, they would attack the USJ. He sat alone at the back of the bus, relishing the solitude, until 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴 took a seat in front of him and began to talk, disrupting his hopes for a peaceful ride. She asked where he had learned to fight like that. He started to explain, but she interrupted, requesting he call her 𝐬𝐶. He found it a bit odd but complied, noting her blush at the nickname. He fabricated a story about attending martial arts classes as a child and mimicking the moves of heroes and famous fighters. Even though he had never set foot in a dojo, the streets had been his true teacher. Kirishima, who had just arrived, expressed disbelief about how he managed to defeat 𝐒𝐵𝐲𝐽, a notoriously difficult and ruthless opponent. The memories had been altered to show him losing, which now threatened to draw even more unwanted attention. Uraraka chimed in, stating that it had been a close match, revealing that Deku had only won because 𝐒𝐵𝐲𝐽 had collapsed from exhaustion, shortly followed by Deku himself due to his injuries from being on the defensive. To answer Kirishima's question, he explained that he and 𝐒𝐵𝐲𝐽 were childhood friends, having spent most of their lives together, living in the same building and attending the same schools. He chuckled nervously, trying to maintain a light-hearted demeanor, but the effort was exhausting. They misinterpreted his weak smile as a sign of sadness over a broken friendship or something similar. He quickly added that it had mostly been luck, wanting to preserve 𝐒𝐵𝐲𝐽's reputation. Kirishima left with a sour expression, intending to question 𝐒𝐵𝐲𝐽 about the match and their history. The jealousy that stirred within him was a sneaky emotion. Uraraka continued to pester him with questions about his quirk, which was starting to grate on his nerves. He explained that it was an emitter-type quirk that enhanced his speed, reflexes, and strength with raw energy, but if he pushed himself too hard, he risked breaking bones and tearing muscles. He hoped this would end the barrage of questions, but it didn't. She exclaimed how cool his quirk was and how he would make a great hero, her eyes sparkling with admiration. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴 chimed in, listing his qualities, her ears turning red, whether from jealousy or embarrassment he couldn't tell. Uraraka added that he was similar to 𝐒𝐵𝐲𝐽, except for the attitude, which sparked a heated argument from 𝐒𝐵𝐲𝐽 himself. Deku's mind wandered, reflecting on what 𝐶𝐮𝐬𝐴 had said about him. It seemed his act was convincing others, which was beneficial for him, though not for them. He looked down, hiding a smirk. They were so gullible. They had never truly seen the world for what it was, unaware of the harsh realities of the slums or the underground. To them, those were merely tales to frighten children, not the grim truth. The real world was filled with harsh realities. He found it amusing to think about their reactions when they discovered just how dark reality could be, the number of unsavory deeds committed by the heroes they admired, and the BLD that stained their hands. When they learn the truth about me, about who I am and what I've done, will they still want to talk to me? A sinister smirk grows at the thought, and I silently revel in the anticipation. I can't wait for the moment when I reveal myself. Capturing their despairing faces on camera will be a treasure, especially 𝐒𝐲𝐻's. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴 grunted as he announced their arrival, trudging down the bus stairs with his beloved sleeping bag under his arm. 𝗬𝗏𝗏 transformed into full fan mode upon seeing the rescue hero 𝗧𝗟𝗘, and I joined in for the fun. Hero 𝗧𝗟𝗘 welcomed the young heroes in training and began to explain the day's search and rescue training, but to me, her words sounded like a distant murmur. I looked around anxiously, wondering where they were. I hoped the plan would work. The purpose of this attack was to announce to the heroes what they wanted to hear. An overpowered villain organization had come to declare a grudge against the #1 hero and would attack boldly in the public eye, a perfect villain to defeat for more praise and profit. This would lull the heroes into a false sense of security, keeping them occupied with the dangerous evil villains while I and the rest of the revolutionaries worked in the shadows. Kirishima suddenly exclaimed about the fake villains to battle, prompting the heroes to spring into action and instruct the students to step back. So predictable. Instead of ensuring the students' safety, they rushed to confront the danger, leaving those in peril to fend for themselves. How unfortunate. Kurohige and Shigaraki spoke loudly, ensuring everyone could hear them. Shigaraki expressed his disappointment that All Might was not present, his voice echoing with intensity. Despite the poor presentation, the heroes seemed to buy into it. Kurohige then surrounded us, warping the students to their designated locations. I had strategically placed everyone in zones where they would be at their weakest. Mineta, who was ineffective anywhere, and 𝗬𝗓𝗓, who was in the icy mountains where frogs struggled. Todoroki, 𝗏𝗏𝗏, and Ojiro were in the fire zone, as one couldn't fight fire with fire, or ice, for that matter. On top of that, each zone was filled with thugs chosen specifically to exploit my classmates' weaknesses, designed to wear them out. After Kurohige had warped everyone away, he and I shared a nod. I pretended to fight him, almost winning, before he narrowly managed to warp me away to the shipwreck zone. I landed gracefully on a rock a few meters behind the ship and watched with delight as Kaminari and Mina tried to devise a plan to escape their predicament. Mina couldn't swim, and if Kaminari got in the water, things wouldn't end well. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted Ida, who had been in the city zone, sprinting out of a building at full speed to fetch reinforcements. Perfect. That meant All Might was coming soon, and we could finally put the specialized 𝗏𝗏 to use, which was thankfully still standing by Shigaraki's side. I knew about All Might's time limit and how it was gradually shortening. Years ago, he could spend about 5 hours a day in his muscular form, but now I estimated he could only manage 3. That was another reason for our plan, to shorten All Might's time limit. Deciding it was time to act, I swam toward the boat and slipped on unnoticed. I saved my classmates by creating a whirlpool that 𝗧𝗟𝗘𝗍 in the opponents in the water, leaping to shore with them on my back. The strain on my leg muscles was intense, but there was no time to rest. As soon as I set them down, All Might crashed in, announcing his arrival with his usual loudness, making my eardrums ring. I could only hope that the 𝗏𝗏 would be able to defeat him or at least incapacitate him. Unfortunately, All Might was alive, albeit exhausted, and still had his tongue intact. The fight was epic, just as I had hoped. His time had been shortened by half an hour. Better yet, Todoroki, 𝗏𝗏𝗏, and I had helped All Might by slowing the 𝗏𝗏 down at the beginning, with Todoroki freezing it in place while 𝗏𝗏𝗏 and I kept it busy. I made sure not to hit too hard, though All for One would not have been pleased with me. I also managed to save Mr. 𝗏𝗏𝗏, fighting off some thugs in the process, which cast me in a more positive light. I even carried him back to the bus since he was badly injured and couldn't walk. Shigaraki, clearly impatient, had sent the Nomu after him. I wasn't sure whether to be angry or grateful for that. Though I had to thank Shigaraki for delivering his lines perfectly and acting the part, he had added a bit too much of his own personality. Still, he managed to convey what we wanted, that he was a big child with dangerous toys. That was how we wanted the heroes to perceive the League, at least for now. On the bright side, only a few students were injured, but no one was kidnapped, killed, or placed in critical condition. However, the media was all over UA for allowing the students to get hurt, which was a plus. We were told we could have a few days off school to rest, but I knew they were actually trying to figure out how the villains had infiltrated UA. Using the secret cameras and bugs that the missed 𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗟𝗘 had placed in the boardroom, I watched and listened to their meeting, feeling somewhat like a viewer. They began to outline what they knew. The newly announced League of Villains had made their goals clear. They wanted all might gone. They seemed to have access to significant resources, and most of the villains involved were low-level criminals, lured in with promises of excitement and money. 𝗎𝐻𝗂 frowned upon hearing this, realizing it provided little useful information. Present Might questioned the detective about the entity that had fought All Might. Detective 𝗧𝗟𝗘 replied that it was unresponsive, suggesting it couldn't or didn't know how to communicate. 13 speculated on the main villain's behavior, noting how he had revealed his quirks, motives, and plans, almost as if he were bragging about a new toy. Snipe added that when they arrived, the villain had thrown a tantrum and left dramatically, like a child. The principal concluded that they were dealing with a man-child wielding far too much power. However, the detective expressed frustration at not being able to identify the villain, noting that neither he nor the Misty figure had registered quirks. Midnight raised a critical question about how the villains had known about their trip to the USJ, as only a few teachers were aware of Class 1A's schedule and All Might's presence. Mr. Aizawa pointed out that the only individuals with access to that information were in the room, aside from the detective. 𝗎𝐻𝗂 whispered that he had an idea about how the villains might have obtained the information, recalling how reporters had infiltrated the school the previous day. He theorized that the villains could have used that distraction to sneak into UA and either access files or receive information from someone within the school. His expression showed he was not pleased with this theory. The implication of a traitor among them sent a chill through the room. Present Mike raised his voice in alarm, prompting Midnight to scold him for being too loud. The unsettling thought of one of their own aiding the villains felt far-fetched to some, but Principal 𝗎𝐻𝗂 urged everyone to consider all possibilities before jumping to conclusions. Meanwhile, a hidden observer found amusement in their discussions, thinking it was naive to believe there was only one traitor in the school. This individual had orchestrated things far beyond what anyone could imagine. They had stealthily slipped out of their room, moving like a shadow, and made their way to a meeting point where 𝗓𝗏𝗧𝗟𝗘 would pick them up. Once in the shadows, the observer waited eagerly. 𝗓𝗏𝗧𝗟𝗘 greeted them warmly before opening a portal, which they quickly entered. They landed in a dim alley behind a nightclub, quickly changing into a more inconspicuous outfit left for them by Toga. Their mission was to scout potential candidates for the League, as they needed more members after the recent attack on UA. After a successful night at the club, the observer had identified 5 promising candidates and a number of less useful individuals. With a cup of sake in their system, they prepared to return to the school, knowing they had to move quickly before curfew. Climbing back up the tree, they checked their room, an old habit from their past. To their dismay, they found several classmates inside, some sleeping and others awake. Panic set in as they considered their options. They climbed along the wall, using the cracks to navigate silently. Finding an empty room, they hoisted themselves through the window, landing with a thud. After ensuring no one was lurking, they sighed in relief, recognizing the room as belonging to a close friend who had helped them out of many tight spots. However, a note was left explaining that a hoodie had been borrowed and that the wash basin had been used. There wasn't enough space to install a full shower, so a basin, kettle, and cloth had to suffice. After finding and setting up a camping shower, privacy was ensured. The clothes were filthy from wandering the streets and climbing a tree, and there was an unpleasant odor from sweat and a hint of alcohol, so cleaning up was necessary. Once presentable, the individual walked to the room, ready with a few solid stories. There were only 15 minutes until the final curfew, so the impending interrogation wouldn't last long. Upon opening the door and turning on the light, a startled gasp escaped as 6 classmates were found standing or sitting in the room: Tenya, Uraraka, Kirishima, Kaminari, Todoroki, and Bakugo. Confusion arose at Bakugo's presence. The question of what they were doing in the room lingered. Todoroki, with a simmering concern, scrutinized the individual, demanding to know what had been happening. The response was a look of bewilderment, followed by an assertion that there had been no sneaking out, just hanging out in another dorm. The request for them to leave was met with resistance from Todoroki, who coldly questioned the truth of the statement. The individual expressed that belief wasn't necessary, as the unexpected intrusion and accusations were unwarranted. The playful banter shifted when Uraraka pointed out the girl's jacket being worn, prompting a blush and a defensive explanation about the clothing choice. The argument about gender fluidity and personal style fell on mostly deaf ears, as Ida began lecturing about proper behavior. Kaminari's teasing only added to the embarrassment, and despite the nervousness, a detailed explanation about the jacket's origin was provided. The playful jabs continued, but the individual remained resolute in their defense. Bakugo, seemingly uninterested, attempted to leave, but Kirishima's apologies softened the atmosphere. As Todoroki pressed on, the frustration boiled over. The individual questioned why their actions mattered to anyone, emphasizing that visiting a friend was allowed and that the window was simply the quickest exit. Guilt washed over the group, especially Ida, while Bakugo's boredom was palpable. The individual continued to express their feelings, highlighting the invasion of personal space and the absurdity of the situation. The request for them to leave was made again, noting the time past curfew. Ida, realizing the breach of rules, ushered everyone out, while Bakugo and Kirishima had already departed. With the room finally quiet, a release of pent-up emotions came in the form of a scream into a pillow, followed by a workout with a punching bag to regain composure. Physically and emotionally drained, the individual turned to the computer, meticulously typing down a list of 55 potential hires, ensuring all information was correct. A smile formed upon reaching a familiar name, someone recruited from the very school earlier in the year. 20 minutes later, the list was sent to all for one before the computer was turned off and the individual climbed into bed. Earlier that night, Bakugo lounged next to Kirishima, aggressively eating a bowl of leftover curry when Todoroki cautiously approached the two, who appeared surprisingly comfortable. Kirishima greeted Todoroki cheerfully. He wondered if anyone could help him with something, his voice monotone yet clearly uncomfortable. Bakugo began to protest, but Kirishima quickly interrupted, offering his assistance. Surprised that the usually antisocial boy was asking for help, Kirishima felt a sense of progress. He looked at Bakugo with his adorable puppy eyes, and Bakugo felt himself defeated. He thought about the things he could make his adorable boyfriend do in return for this favor. Todoroki finally revealed his request. He needed help getting into Midoriya's room. His stoic expression remained unchanged as he explained that something was off with Midoriya, who had been acting suspiciously and seemed to be sneaking out. He expressed his worry and concern, admitting that Midoriya was the only one who had been kind to him. The admission brought a pink hue to his cheeks, a sign of his embarrassment. Kirishima looked at Bakugo expectantly, who mumbled under his breath that he would help, but Todoroki would owe him one. Kirishima sparkled with excitement, while Bakugo barked at Todoroki to not bother him with his problems again. Todoroki nodded in acceptance and turned on his heel, leading them toward Midoriya's room. Along the way, they picked up a few friends, making their group 6 in total. Though Bakugo would never admit it, he was also worried about Midoriya. The boy he remembered was not the same. Midoriya seemed distant, almost fake. Bakugo tried to dismiss his concern, convincing himself that he didn't care about Midoriya, who was just an obstacle in his path to becoming number 1. When they arrived at Midoriya's door, they found it locked. Kaminari confidently declared he could handle it and expertly picked the lock, swinging the door open. Bakugo was taken aback by the sight before him. The room felt surprisingly large, decorated in a green and black color scheme. A plain black desk held only a notebook and an old photo of Midoriya's family, which tugged at Bakugo's heart. He had never believed 𝐒𝐮𝐽𝐫𝐲 should have been arrested for her choices. As he continued to look around, he noticed a bookshelf filled with various books, a well-used punching bag in the corner, and a single poster of All Might on the wall. The room was not what he expected. It was dark and brooding rather than colorful and cheerful. The bed was cluttered with tools and papers, suggesting a project in progress. Exercise equipment filled the room, and drawings of suits and inventions were tacked onto the walls. After 30 minutes of exploring, they heard a rattle, and the door opened to reveal Midoriya, who looked surprised and defensive. Bakugo noted the change in Midoriya's demeanor. It was unexpected but not unwelcome. As Midoriya and Todoroki began to argue, Bakugo caught a faint smell of alcohol in the air. His strong sense of smell allowed him to detect it, raising questions about where Midoriya had been and what he had been doing. Bakugo's mind raced with possibilities. Midoriya must have been visiting his foster father, the one he had always avoided discussing. The thought made Bakugo uncomfortable, and he reminded himself that he shouldn't care. He wanted to leave before any feelings of regret or sympathy could take hold. Lost in his thoughts, he barely registered the tension in the room as Midoriya questioned why they were all there. It's none of their business who he decides to see or visit. What was his life to any of them? He had done nothing wrong. He was back before curfew, so he hadn't broken any rules. He had simply visited a friend in another dorm. Bakugo felt the futility of remaining there and attempted to leave, only to be stopped by Kirishima. After showing the redhead the time, just 2 minutes until curfew, Bakugo managed to escape, Kirishima following closely behind. Bakugo's reasoning was simple. He didn't want the sleep-deprived monitor to come and expel them for something trivial. As they walked down the corridor, Bakugo's mind drifted back to the last time he had seen Midoriya. They were about 11 years old, and Bakugo had been out with some of his friends when he noticed Midoriya desperately trying to drag a heavy-set man down a back alley toward the downtown area. The boy's urgency had been clear, yet no one had bothered to help. That moment haunted Bakugo in secret. Despite everything that had happened, Midoriya was still much the same, aside from improving his style. He still smiled too much, remained cheerful most of the time, overanalyzed everything, and still aspired to be a hero, risking his life to save others. The ongoing hero notebooks were proof of that, and he still looked up to All Might, albeit in a less obsessive way. In fact, he had even helped save All Might. All of Bakugo's suspicions and questions faded into the recesses of his mind, ready to resurface when it was too late to act. He opened his dorm room quietly and trudged inside, Kirishima right behind him. They had become roommates, evolving from strangers to online friends to roommates, and now, something more. Kirishima and Bakugo lay entwined in each other's arms, enjoying the warmth and protection they provided one another. Kirishima murmured a sleepy goodnight, while Bakugo replied with a teasing remark, making sure to stay awake so he could carry Kirishima back to his bed. Kirishima, sensing his thoughts, smiled and placed a gentle kiss on Bakugo's forehead, murmuring his thanks. Bakugo wondered what he had done to deserve such affection. His mind answered with nothing, but he chose to ignore it and savor the moment. After 2 days of rest, they returned to school, and surprisingly, Mr. Aizawa was there, wrapped up like an ancient Egyptian mummy, which was amusing. He instructed the class to listen up, announcing that the UA Sports Festival was in 2 weeks, and they needed to work harder than ever. All of Japan's eyes would be on them. 𝐶𝐮 expressed her concern about the festival, worried that villains might attack again. Mr. Aizawa reassured the class that they had to hold the festival to show they were still strong, emphasizing that there would be tight security and no one would get in or out. As the homeroom ended, they trudged through the day, and when lunchtime arrived, Bakugo happily headed to the cafeteria with Ida and Uraraka, chatting about trivial matters. He joined Azui, Uraraka, and Ida at a table where they discussed the sports festival and their excitement. The conversation shifted to their reasons for wanting to be heroes. Ida mentioned wanting to follow in his brother's footsteps and fight crime, while Azui expressed her longing to protect people, earning Bakugo's respect. When Azui asked Uraraka about her motivation, she hesitated, admitting it wasn't as noble as Ida's. She confessed that she was in it for the money, explaining her family's financial struggles and her determination to provide them with a better life. Bakugo was taken aback. He hadn't expected that from her. As the conversation continued, Uraraka asked Bakugo why he wanted to be a hero. He feigned ignorance but eventually revealed his true motivation: to save those whom society deemed unworthy, the homeless, the abused, and the weak. He vowed to help them even if others tried to stop him. After finishing lunch, Bakugo returned his empty tray to the staff and disposed of his milk carton, which had contained coffee. When the final bell rang, he stood up, eager to leave, but a large crowd blocked the doorway. Frustrated, he muttered to himself, contemplating how he could escape through the windows, but it was impossible. Students from Class B declared war on them, resentful of always being overshadowed, along with many others from different courses. A guy who resembled Aizawa's child approached, reminding everyone that doing well in the sports festival could lead to some students moving up to Class A, while others would leave for good. The thought crossed my mind that perhaps I could find a way to get rid of Mineta. An annoying, haughty voice cut through the crowd, declaring that if we lost, they would take our spots and glory. It belonged to a tall, blonde student from Class 1B, who always wore a contemptuous expression. Activating my analyst ability, I quickly skimmed through his information. His name was Nito Monoma, and his quirk was called Copy. He could be a powerful hero if he focused, but he seemed to struggle with his attitude even more than Bakugo. At least he recognized his flaws and was willing to improve. His teamwork stats were slightly better than Bakugo's. Just as I was about to make my escape, Bakugo charged through the crowd, barking at the students to move aside, asserting that they would never amount to anything. Eventually, I managed to break free and sprinted to the dorms, changing into my exercise clothes that I had unearthed from under a pile of papers and blankets. After locating my keys and locking my door, I was halted by Kaminari and Kirishima, who apologized for the previous night. I laughed it off, assuring them it was okay and apologizing for my earlier frustration. After waving goodbye, I rushed off to the training building, a large structure with glass doors and white bricks, equipped with the latest technology and gym equipment. This facility was reserved for second-year students and above, accessible only with a teacher present or through a rare club card, a birthday gift from my dad to make up for the 12 he missed. It was hard to grasp that my father was one of the greatest villains and a revolutionary, enough to make anyone feel overwhelmed. I entered the building after inputting the code and scanning my card. Once inside, I stowed my bag in a locker and began my stretching and warm-up routine. My workout consisted of 100 push-ups, 200 sit-ups, 50 pull-ups, a 2 kilometers run on the treadmill, and a 20-minute weightlifting session, all recommended by All for One. After that, I practiced some basic gymnastics on the rings and floor. Taking a quick break, I grabbed a water bottle and a packet of chips from the vending machine before heading into the fighting simulator. This advanced piece of technology engaged all of my senses and measured my progress as I fought. It adapted to my skill level, creating tougher opponents for me to face. The objective was to either capture or defeat the enemy, and I usually opted for the latter. It felt like an exhilarating video game that could be played for hours, whether quirkless or with a quirk. I was in my zone, facing 5 opponents and easily outmaneuvering them, unaware that I had been followed and watched for most of the day. Despite everything, Todoroki remained skeptical about what Midoriya had said. He was still sneaking out somewhere. Midoriya was his first and only friend, so he had every right to be concerned. Shaking off those doubts, he returned to his math homework, but his mind was restless. He recalled the day they met as if it were yesterday, back when life was stable and happy. He had been 3.5 years old without his quirk, and his mother was still kind and caring. At the park, he had been playing in the sandbox alone, pretending to be a dragon attacking a kingdom of ice and flowers, his mother's 2 favorite things. Midoriya approached him, nervously introducing himself and asking to play. Despite his shyness, Todoroki managed to offer his shovel as a gesture of friendship. They built an elaborate sandcastle that day and excitedly talked about heroes and quirks. From that moment on, they played together every day. Todoroki often visited the Midoriya household, a small apartment in a quaint neighborhood. They both admired All Might, and Todoroki cherished the time spent admiring Midoriya's vast collection. Those moments were the best of his life, but everything changed when his quirk manifested a week after his 4th birthday. His father ripped him away from his childhood, moving him into a harsh reality. He despised that man. When he learned that Izuku Midoriya was in his class, he felt a surge of hope that they could be friends again. However, he believed he had changed too much and had forgotten how to make friends, let alone rekindle their lost bond. Although Midoriya remained cheerful and determined to be a hero, something felt off. It was an instinctual fear that he couldn't shake, as if Midoriya had transformed into something formidable while he remained vulnerable. It was unsettling and he hated it. Even though his homework remained unfinished, he decided to follow Midoriya and confront him. He needed to understand what had happened to his childhood friend. From the elevator, he observed Midoriya rushing into his room, then out again, speaking with some classmates. Once they left, Todoroki raced down the stairs and slipped outside through the back door, avoiding the common room. Where was he going? Todoroki mumbled under his breath before deciding to follow. Wherever it was, he would go after him. He watched from a distance as Midoriya entered the special second-year training hall, moving with an air of confidence as if he belonged there. Todoroki had a theory about how Midoriya managed to get in, but it didn't align with what he knew about him. What was he doing in there anyway? The Midoriyas weren't wealthy, that was the furthest thing from the truth. Todoroki stood outside the training hall, pretending to dream of the day he could enter the illustrious space himself. A few older students whispered as they walked past, but he paid them no mind. After half an hour, he finally moved and sat down on the grass field opposite the training center, pulling out his phone. He had a feeling it would be a long wait. By the time the sun began to set, most people had returned to their dorms, leaving Todoroki alone on the field. It was then that Midoriya emerged from the building, spotting Todoroki immediately and almost skipping over to him. He greeted Todoroki with a bright smile, tilting his head in curiosity. His large emerald eyes made Todoroki's heart race. Unintentionally, Todoroki took the opportunity to observe Midoriya more closely. His hair was damp with sweat, and his skin glistened in the fading light. The white tank top he wore clung to him, showcasing his toned physique. Todoroki wondered how strong he must be, considering those solid muscles. Todoroki. Midoriya's voice broke through his thoughts. Right, he needed to interrogate Midoriya. However, all the questions he had faded when he looked up at Midoriya's expression. So open, accepting, and pure. His heart raced. Could he really do this? He took a breath and apologized for breaking into Midoriya's room the previous night, admitting it was wrong and hoping for forgiveness. Midoriya smiled softly, as if he had forgiven him long before the apology was uttered. Todoroki felt his face heat up, an unusual sensation since he wasn't using his fire quirk. He blurted out that he looked forward to competing against Midoriya in the sports festival, needing to defeat him to rid himself of the unsettling feelings that lingered. Midoriya responded with a playful challenge, declaring he would do everything he could to win. Despite himself, Todoroki chuckled, teasing that if Midoriya brought his best, he might come close to winning. Midoriya's expression lit up with determination, and with a wink and a laugh, he marched off toward the dorms, leaving Todoroki to ponder what had just occurred. What was wrong with him? He scoffed, thinking of Midoriya as an adorable lamb who, if cornered, could kick pretty hard. With his thoughts settled, he returned to the dorms. Todoroki wondered what he had done to become the object of Midoriya's concern and care. He felt tired and hungry, deciding he would worry about it later. At that moment, all he wanted was food and a long nap. He stumbled into the common room of the dorm, where most of his classmates were relaxing or playing games, a few finishing homework. He made his way to the kitchen, thankfully unnoticed, and rummaged for food. Almost there, he thought to himself, but before he could sneak back to his room with his cup of noodles, a pile of toast, and a handful of fruit, Uraraka spotted him. "Oh, there you are. Where were you?" "We were looking for you," she chirped happily before returning to her card game with Mina and Azui. "I was training," he mumbled, too tired to act cheerful. "I was training too, and I didn't see you on the field," Momo asked, her tone polite but laced with curiosity and suspicion. He sighed, too exhausted to be annoyed. In the training hall. Or else. His exhaustion and sarcasm were evident, making it clear he wanted to be left alone. What? Everyone exclaimed, and the common room fell silent, their unasked questions piercing through him. It seemed he had underestimated their curiosity. How did you even get in there? No one is allowed in without a teacher, and it's only for second years and above. Did you break in? No, you wouldn't have been able to. Then that means, no way, you of all people have one. Momo rambled on, awestruck and forgetting her manners. Did she even manage to say all that in one breath? Just then, Todoroki walked in, and everyone's attention shifted to him, some wearing mischievous expressions. What? He asked, seemingly oblivious. Deku fiddled mindlessly with the club card in his pocket, which probably cost more than most of their houses. He smiled to himself, thinking, "Thanks, Dad." Everyone's mouths dropped in shock, and their attention turned back to him as he shrank back. He tried to ask Todoroki for help with his eyes, but the socially awkward boy shrugged, clueless. Good night, he squeaked, rushing upstairs with his food still in hand, making a beeline for his room. He could hear whispers behind him, questioning how he had a club card and why he was considered a nobody. He growled at the rude comments but quickly brushed them off. There was no use dwelling on the words of people he didn't care about, even if they stung. He stared at the card in his hand, which granted him access to most training facilities, special lunch privileges, and discounts with the support course. Once you had money, everything changed. The rich and powerful received major privileges and were often treated like gods, while the weak and poor were shunned by most, except for a precious few. True heroes. Isn't he a nobody? These people weren't heroes. An inordinate or obsessive zeal for a single thing, idea, or subject suits Monoma perfectly. The sound of the bell echoed through the classroom, a banshee-like wail that grated on the nerves. It was the most annoying thing on the planet. As I walked into class, I realized that my classmates and All Might were tied for the title of the most irritating presence on Earth. How could that guy even be a teacher? As painful as it was to admit, he was a good hero, fast, strong, positive, and charismatic. However, he lacked tact and often acted without thinking, which made him rather obnoxious. His alias was fitting in that regard. Yet, he was a worse teacher than Shigaraki and Dabi combined. Just imagine that lesson. All Might rambled on for a full 10 minutes, and people said a villain's monologue took forever. This guy could talk someone's ear off. He announced that everyone should suit up and wait outside, sounding as if he were on a commercial. Then he singled me out, wanting to speak with me. My heart raced at the thought of what he could want. Did he figure me out? Probably not. He was too gullible and trusting. Perhaps he wanted to discuss my actions during the training exercise. I couldn't mess this up, everyone would be disappointed in me. I couldn't fail them. I stuttered in response, my nerves genuine. He began to address my hero outfit, unsure of how to phrase his thoughts. I breathed a sigh of relief. It was just about my costume. He noted that it looked a bit too villainous, making me appear mysterious and dangerous, almost as if I didn't want anyone to come near me. He laughed, trying to ease the awkwardness. I quietly expressed my longing to be a mysterious and unnoticed hero, like Aizawa-sensei, explaining that there was no need to be flashy or attention-grabbing. He smiled his usual smile and let out a booming laugh before handing me my suitcase. Gratefully, I took it and hurried to the changing rooms. As I entered, I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me. My long-sleeve undershirts were stained and dirty, and I clenched my teeth, preparing for the reactions I would inevitably face. I decided to ignore them. It was bound to happen sooner or later. As I unbuttoned my shirt, I concocted a story to explain my scars, knowing that all these lies would eventually catch up to me. Suddenly, Mineta cried out in triumph, having discovered a peephole. His horror-stricken shout caught my attention, and I turned to see what he was yelling about. The other guys in the changing room gawked at my shirtless upper body, their expressions a mix of shock and disbelief as they took in the scars that marred my skin. Pink scars snaked around my torso, white X-shaped slashes adorned my chest, and there were marks from burns and clawing all over my body. A branding of a cherry flower inside a star marked my side. Rolling my eyes at their astonishment, I turned to put my shirt in my locker, only to reveal even more scars and tattoos on my back. A large red Chinese dragon sprawled across my upper back, accompanied by additional burn marks. I also had a small green rabbit on my collarbone, a prism on my lower back, and a lightning bolt on my wrist, none of which they could see. Kirishima slowly approached, stammering in disbelief, while Bakugo stood behind him, pale and wide-eyed. Kirishima asked about the scars, his voice trembling as if he had seen something truly horrifying. Mineta, ever the pervert, lamented about how ripped I was and how it would attract girls, expressing his frustration. Ignoring their comments, I continued changing, my hands shaking. Just as I was about to leave, Ida stopped me, blunt as ever, pointing out that my tattoos were unprofessional and my scars quite ghastly. He asked how I got them, showing a complete lack of social awareness. With determined eyes, I met his gaze, and he shuddered at the pain reflected in them. I whispered that I hadn't had the greatest life, but that was what drove me to become better. The room fell silent, everyone adopting grim expressions as they realized not everyone had an easy life. I marched out the door, my figure tense and a fire of determination burning in my eyes. Yes, my life had certainly been hellish. Everyone in the room was left feeling cowed and horrified, except for one person who was unfazed. He had seen my body many times before, memorizing every tattoo, scar, burn, and mark. If he was right, I had even gotten rid of some of them, plastic surgery or something. He glanced down at his own tattoo on his wrist, knowing that nothing could shock or surprise him anymore. Later, another hero, who had never taught us before, barked instructions about an extensive workout in preparation for the upcoming sports festival. All Might had an emergency to attend to and sent his apologies. The workout was intense, but I barely broke a sweat. I stood and chatted happily with Todoroki while most of my classmates hunched over, breathing. Only a few, including Todoroki, Bakugo, Momo, Ida, and Ojiro, were merely a bit out of breath. It made sense why many struggled. They relied too heavily on their quirks. Looking around, I sighed. If this was how they performed in training, I dreaded to think how they would fare in the real thing. The trainer, who was actually a government official sent to assist All Might, seemed to agree with the plan. Mr. Ishii urged everyone to get back on their feet and sent them for 2 cool-down laps around the field. Some students attempted to turn it into a competition, but Mr. Ishii quickly put a stop to that, including Bakugo. All Might, who had returned after the 2-hour hero lessons, began to express his pride in the students for their efforts. He encouraged them to keep pushing themselves as the sports festival was just a week away. The final bell rang, signaling the start of the weekend, a welcome sound for most. Bakugo shouted across the courtyard, singling me out. It was frustrating. I just wanted to get my bike and not deal with his antics. He seemed both angry and worried as he confronted me about my scars, tattoos, and piercings. I feigned ignorance, stuttering in response. Bakugo's voice rose as he demanded to know how I acquired my scars and markings. I felt my anger flare, and I reminded him that those scars were gifts from him and his friends, as well as my foster parents. I explained that I simply wanted tattoos and piercings, and since it wasn't against the rules, I saw no problem with it. Bakugo fell silent, and I stepped back, slipping my mask back on and preparing to leave. I bid him farewell, knowing he was too caught up in his own thoughts to respond. I made my way to the garage at the back of the school, primarily for the support classes but also a storage area for students with vehicles. I greeted Didget, the mechanic who had once been a bodyguard for my father. He was the staff member I felt closest to at UA. Didget asked if I was going home, and I confirmed that I was. I quickly changed out of my uniform into more comfortable clothes, worn blue jeans, a dark green t-shirt, a black leather jacket, and scuffed red sneakers. I added my earrings and took out my necklace, feeling much better in my new attire. Didget then informed me, in a hushed tone, that several classmates were tailing me. I was aware of their presence. It was hard not to notice 5 people following closely behind. I realized that my recent actions had sparked their curiosity, and while it could disrupt my plans, I decided to have some fun with it. With a mischievous grin, I nodded at 𝗧𝗟𝗓, who understood my intent. He brought out my pride and joy, a sleek black sports motorbike with green trimming, the latest model from the US, adorned with my father's fiery red dragon insignia. As I walked out with my bike, I noticed the gasps from my classmates hiding behind the building. I donned my helmet and rode off, heading first to the bakery where one of my acquaintances worked. Meanwhile, 𝗬𝗓𝗓, with her mouth agape, wondered if that was really Deku she had just seen. 𝗬𝗓𝗓 confirmed it looked like him but was unsure. 𝗬𝗓𝗓 was eager to catch up, hoping to uncover some dirt on me to elevate his status in class. They followed my trail to the bakery, where they managed to attach a tracking device to my bike, ensuring they could follow me easily. When they saw him emerge from the bakery, they quickly scurried back to their hiding spot. To their astonishment, he walked out with a girl who had blue hair, wearing stylish shorts and a trendy CRP top. They climbed onto his bike, and he handed her a helmet before speeding off to their next destination. 𝗬𝗓𝗓 was beside himself with frustration. He wished he could be with that girl instead of Midoriya. 𝗬𝗓𝗓 was furious, and the rest of the group was stunned by what they had just witnessed. Kirishima quietly remarked that they didn't know much about him. Mina reassured the confused group that they were on a mission to uncover the secrets of one of their most mysterious classmates. Midoriya dropped the girl off at what appeared to be a mall. After she paid him for the ride, he continued on his way. He led his classmates to a classy-looking apartment building, parked his motorbike in a private garage, and entered the reception area. After 30 minutes, he re-emerged dressed in an outfit that looked like it belonged on the cover of a fashion magazine, his hair styled perfectly. The girls blushed, and 𝗬𝗓𝗓 even had a nosebleed. Kirishima felt his cheeks heat up, while 𝗬𝗓𝗓 gawked in disbelief. Midoriya then walked into a modern office adorned in white and silver, and the group of onlookers casually followed him inside. They trailed him up a long glass staircase, where he stopped at the penthouse floor and walked past the guards without a glance. The group waited in silence for a good half hour, growing restless. Mina was ready to charge into the room, but Momo held her back. At 5:39, Izuku emerged from the room, skirting an older, impeccably dressed lady. He thanked her for her generous contribution to the business, and she assured him it had been taken care of. He escorted her to her white limousine, bidding her good night with a courteous gesture as she drove away. He then walked to a nearby park, tidying up some trash and disposing of it properly. Sitting on a bench, he seemed to be waiting for someone, checking his phone repeatedly. Mina whispered to Momo, wondering who he was waiting for, while Momo speculated that the person might not be coming. With a defeated expression, Izuku eventually got up and walked away, stopping at a rundown chip shop where he ordered food. He appeared to know the girl at the counter well, chatting with her for a while before leaving again. As the clock struck 7 and the moon rose, someone recognized him and let out an excited call. A girl in a basic school uniform with 2 buns on her head approached him, playfully flirting as she fiddled with her hair. Izuku blushed and laughed off her antics, and they chatted for an entire hour before saying a reluctant goodbye. He then returned to the apartment block, presumably to sleep. The group followed him until they reached what seemed to be his apartment. He searched for his keys but couldn't find them. Frustrated, he muttered to himself about having to pick the lock again, clearly upset about more than just his missing keys. In seconds, he managed to unlock the door, stepping inside and closing it behind him. Mina expressed her disappointment that they hadn't uncovered anything juicy that day. Momo countered that they had learned quite a bit. He rode a motorbike, gave lifts to people who paid him, dealt with important individuals, and had a fashionable style. She noted that he seemed to know people from various backgrounds, suggesting he was wealthy but had recently acquired his status. The group was curious about how she figured all this out. Momo explained that his second outfit was from a designer whose latest creations hadn't been released yet, and the important lady he was with was the wife of a French merchant, indicating his high standing in society. She added that he seemed more familiar with the less fortunate, suggesting he had only recently gained his position. Mina expressed frustration that while they had gathered information, it only raised more questions. 𝗬𝗓𝗓 suggested they ask Midoriya directly on Monday, feeling anxious about getting home before it got too late. 𝗬𝗓𝗓 agreed, and they all nodded, deciding to leave. Izuku let out a deep breath, relieved to be rid of them. He quickly changed out of his stylish outfit and into something more casual. He raced down the stairs to the parking area, retrieving a duffel bag and a hoodie from the back of his bike. Throwing on the black hoodie, which had dark blotches and splatters, he met Toga in the park, who had a wild look in her eyes. He nodded in response to her question about getting rid of the group from UA. Pulling out items from his duffel bag, he revealed a weapon and a knife, a chilling smile spreading across his face. Today was an exciting day, and he was ready for what lay ahead. The UE Sports Festival was approaching, and despite the recent USJ attack, UE had chosen to proceed with the event. He wondered if this decision might invite trouble from villains looking to take advantage of the situation. Yuji informed Carol that the school had significantly increased security, noting the presence of numerous pro-heroes. He remarked that no villain would dare to attack, especially with so many heroes around. Tamura, feeling anxious, turned off the television that had been broadcasting the English news. He muttered to himself that Izuku better not mess things up, given the overwhelming number of professionals present. As the morning began, Hazama gently urged Midoriya to wake up. Midoriya stretched and thanked Hazama as he placed breakfast in front of him. He reached for the coffee, savoring the rich Italian blend, before tackling the oats, yogurt, and fruit. However, as he attempted to stand, a wave of dizziness forced him back down. Groaning, he buried himself under the covers, lamenting his condition. Hazama, maintaining his usual monotone, reminded Midoriya of the previous night's events. Midoriya recalled a meeting with a Yakuza gang to bolster their defenses and offenses. He struggled to remember the details, realizing he might have overindulged. Hazama explained that, despite Midoriya's worries, he hadn't consumed any alcohol. After the meeting, he had invited some new members for a training session, which had turned chaotic. One of the new recruits, Muscular, had thrown him against the wall during the sparring match. Hazama had intervened quickly to ensure Midoriya received care for his injury. Once he felt steady enough, Midoriya continued his morning routine, preparing mentally for the day ahead. He reflected on the difficulty of portraying stability when he felt anything but. After getting ready, he made his way to the train station to catch the school train. As he waited, he overheard students whispering excitedly about him. The attention made him uncomfortable, and he curled inward as the crowd's excitement grew. An elderly woman wished him luck for the sports festival, and a businessman expressed his anticipation for the event. Midoriya felt overwhelmed by the barrage of questions and encouragement, struggling to keep his composure. A young boy approached him with eager questions, while his mother attempted to pull him away. Just then, a girl in UA's uniform intervened, drawing the crowd's attention away from Midoriya. With her striking appearance, she managed to defuse the situation, allowing Midoriya to breathe a sigh of relief. Grateful, he thanked her, and she responded with a friendly wink before the train arrived at UA. He waved goodbye to the young boy and felt a sense of relief wash over him as he entered the school. Midoriya spotted Uraraka and Ida, who had walked from the dorms. They entered the classroom early, where Mr. Aizawa surprised everyone by arriving ahead of schedule. He reminded the students of the importance of the day and instructed them to change into their PE uniforms. As the bell rang, the students hurried to the changing rooms. Midoriya, having worn his sports kit underneath his uniform, waited for Ida. Todoroki approached him, playfully warning that he would give it his all in the upcoming competition. Midoriya responded confidently, challenging him to bring his best. He simply smirked, and in a moment of childish defiance, she stuck her tongue out at him. Fate, it seemed, had a twisted sense of humor, as she found herself as the grade representative, tasked with delivering a speech to the entire audience. It was due to her unexpected high score on the exam, but she still blamed fate for the pressure. Drawing on the charisma her father was known for, she took a deep breath and began her speech. Today was an extremely important day for all the students. The UA Sports Festival, an event that would shape their futures. This was an incredible opportunity, one they would only receive 3 times in their lives. She urged everyone to give their best and ended with a determined smile, though her nerves were evident. The crowd erupted in cheers as she hopped down from the podium, eager to escape the spotlight and wishing to wash away the pressure of being a hero. The R-rated hero announced the first event in an overly dramatic tone. The first event was an obstacle course. With a smirk, she joined the throng at the starting line, where competitors jostled for position. Under her father's orders, she needed to do something remarkable and memorable. Winning the festival was not her goal. She aimed to be remembered, which would make her eventual betrayal all the more impactful. She could already envision the headlines. With a loud "Go!" from Present Mic, she launched herself forward. Activating her dash, energy surged through her as she skillfully navigated around the robots, leaving her competitors in awe. Using a metal pole she had picked up, she propelled herself across a gorge, landing perfectly on the other side. She had trained for this moment. As she climbed over a net, she halted at a daunting river, unsure of her next move. Todoroki and 𝐒𝐵𝐲 were close behind her. Analyzing the river, she calculated its width and depth, realizing she had to jump and hope for the best. Spotting a scrap piece of metal, she secured it to her back and took a running start, energy coursing through her as she leaped over the rushing water. The pole snapped under the strain, nearly sending her tumbling in. The final obstacle was a field filled with explosives. 𝐒𝐵𝐲 and Todoroki charged ahead, seemingly unfazed by the danger. Their reckless dash was abruptly halted when 𝐒𝐵𝐲 triggered an explosive, sending them both stumbling back. Present Mic commented that while the explosion was powerful, it wouldn't cause serious harm. With that in mind, she quickly gathered some of the small explosives, placed the metal sheet over them, and launched herself toward the finish line. In a triumphant announcement, Present Mic declared her the first-place winner, followed closely by Todoroki and 𝐒𝐵𝐲. Just as she began to celebrate, Midnight interrupted with the announcement of the next event, a cavalry battle. As the first-place winner, she became the target for everyone, worth 10 million points. Unsurprisingly, no one wanted to team up with her at first. Ida declined, but she managed to convince Uraraka and Tokoyami to join her. Then, a girl named Mei Hatsum jumped in, eager to showcase her inventions. Excited by her gadgets, they agreed to meet later for some tinkering and inventing. As the event began, she sat atop her team, weightless thanks to Uraraka's quirk. With the sound of the bell, they raced off, immediately shifting into defense mode as other teams targeted them. They dodged and weaved, managing to collect some headbands along the way. They were in first place with a score of 10,020. Even if they lost the 10 million headband, they would still advance, but she wanted a solid victory. With only a few teams remaining, she placed the headband around her neck. Although 𝐒𝐵𝐲 had briefly taken it, she quickly reclaimed it, though he had destroyed one of Mei's rocket shoes in the process. As the final moments approached, she directed her teammates on where to attack, exploiting their opponent's weaknesses, especially Todoroki's right side. In a last-ditch effort, Todoroki's team charged forward, using his fire abilities to push past Dark Shadow. However, Uraraka lifted them high above, and Mei propelled them to safety with her remaining rocket. Unfortunately, Ida revealed a secret move and snatched the headband from around her neck, securing victory for his team. Exhausted, they all collapsed to the ground as the gong sounded. Present Mic excitedly commented on the adrenaline-filled game, while Midnight instructed everyone to cool off and hydrate. They nodded tiredly and went to refresh themselves. In a separate conversation, Tamura expressed his frustration at Izuku for allowing Ida to take the headband, questioning the logic behind it. Kurohige simply shrugged, returning to his task of cleaning the shot glasses, leaving Tamura exasperated. Shigaraki narrowed his eyes at the screen, questioning Midoriya's actions. Meanwhile, the students at UE anxiously lined up, eagerly awaiting the results. Midnight announced the moment everyone had been waiting for, her voice filled with excitement. A drum roll echoed from the speakers as she revealed, in fourth place, Team Shinso. Surprise rippled through the crowd, with everyone except Shinso looking shocked. Even the team itself seemed disoriented. In third place, Team 𝐒𝐵𝐲. Midnight discreetly used a compact version of her quirk to keep 𝐒𝐵𝐲 from causing chaos, ensuring UA maintained its reputation. In second place, oh, this is a surprise. How did he? I see now. Clever. Midnight's muttering piqued the crowd's curiosity. While my team exchanged apologies and excuses, I observed quietly. 𝗏𝐼𝐻 revealed that Dark Shadow had taken a 700-point headband from Momo. You honestly think we lost? Don't worry. You'll see, I assured them with a gentle smile, my confidence calming them slightly and sparking their curiosity further. In second place, Team Todoroki, which means Team Midoriya, is first. Midnight declared, and the crowd erupted in disbelief. What? The students exclaimed, some visibly frustrated. As you all seem confused, Midoriya, please come up and explain, Midnight said, scanning the crowd for me. I chuckled nervously from behind her, announcing my presence. She jolted, letting out a muffled squeak. Well then, she cleared her throat, please explain what you did to your confused peers. She handed me the microphone. It was pretty simple, actually. I just used some sleight of hand and mind games. They grabbed the 10,000-point headband, thinking it was the 10 million. You see, they saw me putting the 10 million headband around my neck, but it didn't stay there. While we were in the air, I slipped the 10 million headband to May, and she gave me her 10,000 headband. I smiled sheepishly at the crowd, who stared at me in disbelief, annoyance clear in their eyes. Thankfully, Bakugo was still unconscious. I quickly hopped off the stage before they could react and Midnight shooed us all away. I couldn't wait to see what the rest of the festival had in store. Midnight announced the next event would be one-on-one battles, but first, there would be a 30-minute break with fun activities for those who didn't make the cut. I plopped down in a chair in the waiting room, sighing as I began to strategize how to defeat each of my opponents while keeping my cover. I needed to save a few tricks for later. If I faced Uraraka, I would need to tire her out and overpower her at the end, or I could take her out quickly since she didn't have much fighting experience. I just needed to avoid being touched by her. If I faced Bakugo, I needed to end it quickly as the bell rang, picking him up and throwing him out before he could regain his bearings. My thoughts were interrupted by my stomach growling loudly, demanding attention. The few others in the room turned to me, some giggling as my face turned red. I forgot my lunch, I whined after searching my backpack in vain for about 10 minutes. Then I remembered something and gleefully took out my phone. I quickly sent a message in the group chat and, using a special program I had helped create with Kurogyari and the doctor, warped my lunch from the manor kitchen into my hand. An excited squeak escaped my lips despite myself. Did it materialize correctly this time? The sandwich is edible, the juice is still in its box, and the rice and salad didn't get mixed up. Thank goodness it's all here, I muttered as I inspected the contents of the bento, which had gotten a little banged up on the trip. I cautiously bit into the sandwich, and it tasted just right. After a few hesitant bites, I happily enjoyed my lunch, ignoring the curious stares from my classmates. Did that just appear out of nowhere? Someone exclaimed, likely Ashido. Is that part of his quirk? Another person wondered, sparking an argument about what my quirk could be, though none dared to approach me with questions. Once I finished my lunch, I warped the empty container back to my room and planned to clean up and maybe visit Recovery Girl. However, I was stopped by none other than Shoto Todoroki, who I still hadn't fully forgiven for his actions during the card incident. Come with me, he commanded, his tone serious. Whatever he wanted to discuss seemed important. He led me down the stairs to a secluded spot outside the building, where he stared at me for an awkward minute before finally speaking. You broke the pact I made. I tilted my head in confusion, unsure of what he meant. You tricked me into using my fire. I swore to myself that I would never use that power, especially after what he did. He began to share his story of how his father had abused him and his family, causing his mother to lose her sanity. I vaguely remembered her as a kind woman with white hair and an ice quirk, which I had found fascinating when I was younger. She had made it snow in my room when I was sick during the Christmas holidays. Hearing Todoroki mention that she had poured boiling water on him because she thought he resembled his father ignited a fire of anger within me. Was that why he had panicked at the kettle during the tour? I felt a surge of empathy for him. He despised his father for the pain he had caused his family and, in defiance, refused to accept his father's power, determined to win using only his ice. I sensed potential in him. The atmosphere was tense as the two stood facing each other. One of them, with a grim expression and pain evident in his eyes, understood the turmoil within the other. He recognized the longing to rebel against a father who had caused so much suffering. The weight of empathy filled the air as he spoke, urging the other to embrace his own power rather than be limited by the past. He encouraged the other to use his abilities in ways that defied expectations, to challenge the notion of what a hero should be. The stoic facade of the other began to crack, revealing confusion and a hint of vulnerability. The realization that his life was not the only one affected by their father's actions hung heavily in the air. As the announcement for the next event echoed, one of them waved goodbye and dashed off, leaving the other deep in thought about the implications of those words. The event was a combat challenge, where participants were to demonstrate their skills without causing serious harm. Some chose to forfeit, leaving others to wonder about the reasons behind their decisions. One participant, feeling inadequate and manipulated, shared his frustrations about being controlled by another's quirk. The reassurance offered by a friend filled him with determination, igniting a spark of hope that he could still become a great hero. As the matches began, the tension escalated. The first match was between two competitors, each waiting anxiously for the signal to start. When the bell rang, one sprang into action, launching a series of swift attacks. The other, caught off guard, struggled to keep up, his defenses faltering as the fight progressed. Despite the challenges, the fighter remained agile, dodging attacks with impressive acrobatics. The opponent, lacking stamina, began to falter, resorting to taunts that revealed his own insecurities. The fighter felt a surge of anger at the unfairness of the accusations, knowing that his own journey had been fraught with hardship. In a moment of clarity, he revealed a part of his past, a truth that caught the opponent off guard. The fight continued, but now it was infused with deeper emotions as both competitors grappled not just with physical prowess but with their own histories and struggles. "I've had a hard life, so don't come here spouting nonsense about how privileged I am." 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴 smirked, his monotone voice cutting through the tension. The intensity of the moment caused Midoriya's body to stiffen, and he felt his consciousness beginning to slip away. He locked onto 𝐒𝐮𝐴's gaze, surrendering to the pull of his control as information flooded his mind. "That was it. Turn around and walk out of the ring," 𝐒𝐮𝐴 commanded, his smile reminiscent of Aizawa's. Midoriya's last thought before everything went blank was a determination to attack. He slowly turned around, moving like a dancer in a music box, and took a step toward the boundary. "Midoriya, walk out of the ring." 𝐒𝐮𝐴's frustration replaced his earlier smugness. The crowd shouted at him, but their voices were drowned out. His friends were in distress, and the villains yelled at him from across the screen, Shigaraki nearly smashing it in anger. Suddenly, Midoriya felt his posture relax, the whites of his eyes darkening as his pupils glowed a bright red, though no one could see. The way to break free from 𝐒𝐮𝐴's control was through pain. He smiled triumphantly, desperately trying to mask the pain his quirk was causing him. "I can't do that." "Then I'll lose," he rasped, responding to 𝐒𝐮𝐴's earlier statement. "What? But I brainwashed you. How can you move on your own?" 𝐒𝐮𝐴 growled, his expression shifting slightly. "I guess I'm immune," Midoriya joked, flashing a devilish grin. In a blur, he bounded forward, flipping 𝐒𝐮𝐴 headfirst and gently kneeing him in the stomach. He then grabbed him by the shoulders and flung him out of the ring. "Midoriya is the winner," Midnight announced shakily, her surprise evident. The crowd erupted in awe. How did he escape? Midoriya stumbled over to the purple-haired boy. "Hey, are you all right? I'm so sorry about that." He stuttered, helping him to his feet. "Are you okay?" he asked again, receiving a grunt in response. "Your quirk is so cool, by the way," he exclaimed as they shuffled toward the infirmary, surprising 𝐒𝐮𝐴, who remained silent. "When you get into the hero course, can I please study it? It's so interesting and can be extremely powerful with practice. Imagine, all you'd have to do is speak to a villain, and the day would be saved. There are so many possibilities." He rambled excitedly. "How does your quirk even work? Can it work over radio? Cell phones? If so, that's amazing." He continued firing questions all the way to Recovery Girl, who was not pleased to see him. He laid 𝐒𝐮𝐴 down on one of the beds, gratefully took a recovery gummy, and left the infirmary after a firm scolding and a thorough checkup from recovery girl. He wasn't hurt, just low on energy, which could be fixed with coffee and carbohydrates. So, he headed to the tuck shop run by the business class students to get himself an espresso and 2 boxes of chips. "Where are you, Toga?" he called out into the empty parking lot. "Here I am, Aizu," a sing-song voice chimed from behind him. He turned around to see a young, short girl with pale skin and blue hair, wearing a little black princess dress. She had butterfly-like wings and antennae, suggesting a butterfly mutation quirk. "Interesting. I like your new form. So, who did you shapeshift into this time?" he asked, his tone light. "A young girl from South Africa visiting her brother in Japan." "I am Julie Grobel," she replied in a pitchy voice, dipping into a bow. Midoriya opened his mouth to respond, but she cut him off. "Don't worry. She's still alive. Just unconscious due to extreme BLD loss." She winked and he sighed. "So, do you have it?" she asked excitedly. "Of course, my lady. What kind of guy would I be if I forgot my dearest's birthday?" he teased, taking her hand and pretending to kiss it with exaggerated passion. "Oh, Izuku. You charmer. How dare you play with a little lady's feelings?" she giggled, trying to play along. He presented her with a white package splattered with fake BLD. Her face lit up like a Christmas tree as she opened the box. New vials of BLD. And they're labeled too. Best Genus Niece, Prime Minister's Son, Hyperion Gold Number 11 Hero, MT Lady, and... "Oh my gosh, Izuku-kun, how did you know?" she squealed, holding up 2 vials labeled Lolo Hamiko and Stacy Norman. He could only imagine what they could do. "I've wanted to make them pay for so long. Now I can." She laughed, her excitement palpable. "You aren't finished yet. Push the button at the bottom of the box," he encouraged, and she screamed in delight. She happily pressed the red button, and the box opened to reveal a second layer filled with knives, from trench knives to butterfly knives. She danced around, counting the knives. "There are 25 knives. This is way too much, Aizu," she cooed. "Never," he began to tease but decided against it. "After all you've done for me, it would be unfair not to give you this much. Besides, I want to make this your best birthday ever." He gave her a crooked smile as she squealed and jumped around. This was the second birthday she had ever celebrated. The first one he doubted she remembered. She wrapped him in a tight hug, and he quickly pushed her away before he was overwhelmed. "Even in the body of an 11-year-old girl, you are still as strong as ever," he complimented, short of breath, and she blushed. Finally, she read the card that had somehow stayed attached to the package. It read, "Happy 20th birthday, Toga. May all your wishes come true. Signed, The League, with everyone's names included." She smirked at him, a way to hide her tears, and commented, "I never knew you could be so cheesy, boss." He growled in annoyance at her teasing. Shigaraki wasn't even there. "Humph, I'm not the boss yet, Toga." I was still on trial and didn't consider Shigaraki a rival for the position. She flashed a cheeky grin and gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, reminding me of her youthful spirit. I mentioned that there was an even better gift waiting for her at the bar, winking as I skipped back to the stands. I hoped Twice would remain patient and not spoil the surprise we had planned for her. Knowing him, though it was unlikely, it had been his idea after all. I hurried back to the viewing area, disappointed to have missed several matches. The current bout was Aoyama versus Ishido, and it was clear who would win, Ishido. She possessed far more skill than Aoyama, who, despite his power, lacked the creativity and technique needed to compete effectively. He simply stood and shot, which was insufficient against someone as inventive and quick as Ishido. Midnight announced Ishido as the winner, confirming my prediction. I felt a pang of disappointment for missing so many matches, but I had asked Shigaraki to record them. He better have done it, otherwise I would have to find a way to make him regret it. I was particularly interested in observing Shoto Todoroki and Denki Kaminari. I needed to analyze Todoroki's fighting style and gather more personal information about Endeavor, and who better to get that from than his own son. As for Kaminari, I couldn't quite understand why he intrigued me, but there was something about him that caught my attention. Despite my ability to read others' emotions, my own often remained a mystery. I reminded myself that the next match was about to start. Present Mike announced Momo Yaoyorozu from 1A against 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽𝐻 Tokoyami, also from 1A. Midnight signaled the beginning of the match, cracking her WHP as she did so. I watched intently, unsure of how this match would unfold. The possibilities were endless, making it an exciting contest. Tokoyami took the offensive immediately, not allowing Yaoyorozu to create anything that could be used against him or Dark Shadow. Dark Shadow loomed over Tokoyami and attacked Yaoyorozu with a fierce screech. She defended herself with a bow staff and shield, managing to protect her uniform from further damage. Throughout the match, she remained on the defensive, darting around like a rabbit, while Tokoyami advanced steadily with Dark Shadow at his side. I noted that she could have created mini flash bombs to temporarily distract Dark Shadow and leave Tokoyami vulnerable, but she seemed unable to think outside the box. Instead, she focused solely on defense until she was ultimately pushed out of the ring. The match lasted only about 10 minutes, which felt rather anticlimactic, especially since she had advanced by recommendation. I expected more from her, and this loss would likely shake her confidence. Did I care? Not really. Her self-doubt and dwindling self-esteem were not my concern. However, Todoroki's issues with his father were my responsibility. I would need to come up with an inspiring speech to encourage him to unleash his full potential, something more detailed than what I had said earlier. Uraraka's voice broke through my thoughts, reminding me that I had been muttering to myself. I felt embarrassed and quickly apologized, rubbing the back of my head. She smiled and returned to talking with Ida, while I resumed jotting down notes on Todoroki. The bell rang, signaling the end of the match, which ended in a draw. Kirishima and Tetsutetsu's match was the complete opposite of Momo's and Tokoyami's. It felt like it lasted forever, though it was only 20 minutes. They were evenly matched, with Kirishima having a slight edge in technique. Eventually, they decided on a tiebreaker, arm wrestling, which seemed rather unprofessional to me. I didn't bother with the results, as I could already guess the victor. I had my own responsibilities to attend to. Uraraka was about to face 𝐒𝐵𝐾𝐲, and as her supportive friend, I needed to help her devise a strategy to defeat him. It shouldn't be too difficult, considering how long I had studied 𝐒𝐵𝐾𝐲's fighting style. I called out to Uraraka, who was walking briskly. The paper containing all the strategies I had prepared for her lay muddy on the floor, having been handed back to me. She turned to face me and Ida, determination on her face, though her worry was evident. She reassured me that she could handle it on her own, insisting that she needed to learn to plan for her battles without relying on us. With a chuckle, she clenched her fists and marched toward the arena. Ida and I exchanged glances, but before he could speak, his phone rang. He answered it, went pale, and rushed toward the stairs leading to the exit. I wondered what that was about. I looked back at the archway where Uraraka had just walked through. If she wanted to be overconfident and risk defeat, that was her choice. I had given her a list of 𝐒𝐵𝐾𝐲's weaknesses and strategies she could use. She didn't have to follow them, but rejecting my help without even considering it felt frustrating. Much. The narrators stopped themselves before getting worked up further. They reminded themselves not to get too attached to the dreamers around them. They slapped their cheeks, trying to shake off the feelings. As they walked back to the viewing area, they focused on their motives and the stakes of being there. They couldn't afford to get caught up in the hero's web of lies and their cheerful lifestyles. The narrator continued to berate themselves internally, their resolve hardening. They couldn't wait to leave this place. At least they could observe the dreamers before the world corrupted them. They had to be there when the dreamers learned just how harsh the world could be, a world they had chosen to serve without complaint. They would need to bring their camera. The role of a hero had shifted. It was no longer about saving people or providing hope. It had become a ruthless competition, where the strong crushed the weak and cast away those they feared. 𝐒𝐵𝐾𝐲 was a perfect representation of this, though he was a bit too obvious about it for the hero's taste. The narrator hopped down the stairs, scanning for a place to sit. 𝐒𝐵𝐾𝐲's group occupied the spot they had been in earlier, and they didn't want to sit there or near the others, most of whom were awkwardly flirting. The only available space was in the highest row, alone, as Ida had yet to return. They were a few seats away from Todoroki, who didn't seem to want company, and neither did the narrator, to be honest. They arrived just in time to watch Uraraka execute her final strategy. The floating rocks came crashing down toward Bakugo, who seemed to do nothing. The narrator knew Uraraka must have tried hard to beat Bakugo, but he overpowered her in every aspect. Such a simple strategy wouldn't work against him, especially since she underestimated his intelligence. Despite his violent and foul-mouthed demeanor, he was quite intelligent, excelling in battle strategy and quick thinking. This, combined with his drive to be the top hero and his powerful quirk, made him a formidable opponent, someone not to be underestimated. Uraraka seemed to be making a grave mistake. Bakugo blasted the boulders into dust, resembling a garden fountain in the process, which made the narrator chuckle. Uraraka collapsed on the floor, and Midnight declared Bakugo the winner of the match. The crowd erupted, some booing while most cheered, with a few chanting his name. Bakugo didn't gloat or smirk, he simply dipped his head at the unconscious Uraraka before heading toward the infirmary. The narrator noted this change in him. It was for the better. Finally, the next match began, the narrator versus Shoto Todoroki. They rolled their shoulders back and limbered up while waiting for Midnight's signal. A glance at Todoroki revealed he was staring straight at Endeavor, not at them. It seemed their words had sunk in as he assessed them from the corner of his eye, but his hatred for his father was stronger than ever. He probably wouldn't use his fire quirk unless absolutely necessary, or perhaps not at all. The narrator would have to make it necessary. They chuckled, a plan forming in their mind, thinking it would be fun when Midnight finally gave the starting signal. They intended to break Todoroki down piece by piece before rebuilding him to be stronger than anyone thought possible. Todoroki shot a massive glacier of ice at the narrator, who leaped into the air to dodge. Their energy levels were stable, and they were ready. As Todoroki launched spears of ice and attempted to freeze them in place, the narrator darted back and forth, occasionally landing hits on him, taunting him. Finally, Todoroki had had enough and launched a colossal iceberg at them, but the narrator braced themselves and dashed forward, punching through it. The iceberg shattered into countless pieces, scattering everywhere. In that split second of shock, the narrator sprinted toward Todoroki and rammed into his stomach. He was thrown back but quickly regained his footing, anchoring himself by freezing his feet to the concrete floor. Impressive. The narrator noted that Todoroki hadn't taken their words to heart yet, so they would have to change their method. As Todoroki readied his next attack, the narrator charged at him. Instead of slamming into him, the narrator slid between his legs, grabbing his ankles and flipping him to the ground. Todoroki propelled himself up with a burst of ice, trying to encase the narrator again, and he succeeded. But before anyone could react, the narrator burst out of the frozen prison, raw energy radiating off them in green waves that made the entire stadium tremble. They slammed Todoroki into the ground once more, but he quickly stood up, attempting to grab and freeze them again. The narrator easily dodged, but Todoroki's attention had shifted elsewhere. Throughout the fight, Endeavor had been glaring at them, his gaze sending prickles up the narrator's neck, silently urging Todoroki to use his fire quirk. Todoroki kept looking up at him, sometimes focusing entirely on him, which began to frustrate the narrator. They muttered about manners, earning a small smirk from Todoroki. The narrator swept their legs under him, and he used his ice as a catapult to escape. The narrator shouted that Todoroki was fighting them, not Endeavor, demanding his attention. As piercing icicles hailed down from above, the narrator knew Todoroki could hear them, as could the entire audience, who murmured in confusion. They destroyed Todoroki's next attack with a series of quick punches. He was starting to slow down now. The taunts flowed effortlessly from his lips as he dodged another icy projectile. He remarked on his opponent's struggles, noting that despite the injuries, he remained standing. He challenged him to bring forth his full strength, emphasizing that he would not make it easy. His words began to take their toll, and he could see the frostbite affecting his opponent. He urged him not to ignore him, insisting that it was his own power that mattered. With a sudden burst of steam rising from his opponent, he felt a surge of triumph. It worked. He had pushed him to the edge and now he would be stronger for it. As steam enveloped the stage, he decided to match his opponent's intensity. Flames erupted around him, and he grinned back, feeling the green energy surround him. They exchanged a look, an unspoken agreement forming between them. With a surge of power, he raised his fist, ready to strike the ground, while his opponent prepared a fiery attack. The arena transformed into a dazzling display of red, green, and blue energy. The air crackled with power, shaking the very foundations of the building. The stage began to crack, and the audience, from civilians to heroes, sat on the edge of their seats, trembling with anticipation. Midnight called out urgently for 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐬𝐿 to intervene, her voice laced with panic. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐬𝐿 quickly raised thick walls from the center of the stage, attempting to contain the impending clash. A blinding flash of light erupted, followed by a surge of heat, and then a tremendous explosion. The walls had somewhat succeeded in their purpose. Todoroki emerged relatively unscathed, while he himself had sustained a few injuries, perhaps a cracked rib. However, the arena was another story. The stage lay in ruins, the walls reduced to ash, and debris scattered everywhere. Silence fell over the stadium as the audience struggled to process what had just occurred. 2 first-year students had nearly demolished the entire stadium. If it weren't for 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐬𝐿, the destruction would have been total. Civilians were shaken, students terrified, and every member of Class 1A stood in shock, their mouths agape and eyes wide. They had always known Todoroki was powerful, being Endeavor's son, but Midoriya's strength had taken them by surprise. He had literally shattered the ground with a single punch. Midnight announced the winner, her voice trembling as she declared, "Shoto Todoroki wins. His opponent is out of the ring." The realization of their immense power was staggering, and she couldn't help but wonder what their future children would be like. If they worked together, they could potentially overpower even All Might, the top hero. It was clear that the coming years would be eventful with this group, and Midnight sensed it deeply. Hisashi had messy red-orange hair. After passing out from his match with Todoroki, he woke up just in time for the award ceremony. Although he had lost, it didn't bother him because he had completed his mission, well, a submission, to help Todoroki reach his full potential. He had also gained another opportunity. Shinso was waiting for him when he woke up, asking to train with him. It was clear that Hisashi's words had made an impact. His original mission had also been semi-accomplished, as he had certainly made an impression during the sports festival, perhaps a bit too much of an impression. Once the award ceremony concluded, everyone was sent back to their dorm rooms, and it was announced that students had special permission to go home and celebrate with their families. Those leaving had to sign a slip for their homeroom teacher, who would keep a record and provide each student with a pass for the gate. It was standard procedure. Hisashi rushed out the gate, phone in hand and bag on his back, knowing Hazama was supposed to pick him up since he couldn't retrieve his bike from the locked garage. Suddenly, a voice called out to him. Uraraka, Ashido, and Azui approached, all smiling at him, which made him feel suspicious. At that moment, he didn't have the capacity to deal with them. He needed to return to the bar for a meeting with Stain. Shigaraki had conveniently forgotten to mention that the meeting was today. Thankfully, Kurogyari had handled Stain earlier, informing him that their leader was not present and would return later that afternoon. Stain was expected to provide a report on the heroes he had managed to eliminate from the list they had given him, and possibly a few others, knowing him. Hisashi forced a smile, trying to appear cheerful. He greeted them with a bright tone, almost as if the background had turned pink and sparkly. Ashido, with her bubbly personality, suggested they go to the train station together. Hisashi felt suspicious. He wondered why they wanted to do that and how Ashido knew he usually took the train. It was troublesome. Activating his analytical skills, his eyes brightened and pupils narrowed as he observed them. He didn't have enough time to scrutinize each of them individually, so he had to do a group sweep, which was less reliable. They clearly had hidden intentions, though he couldn't pinpoint them. He suspected they wanted to question him. Truth be told, he would have loved to create more confusion, but he had an important meeting to attend. He declined Ashido's invitation, explaining that someone else was taking him home. They didn't believe him, and 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴 insisted it would be fun, mentioning their plans to go shopping before heading to the train station. 𝐬𝐴 shook his head, exasperated, as they continued to press him. Just then his phone rang, startling him. He quickly retrieved it from his pocket. 𝐒𝐼𝐴's voice came through, smooth and almost playful, asking if he was ready to be picked up. 𝐬𝐴 confirmed, requesting 𝐒𝐼𝐴 to bring his old green duffel bag, a code for a discreet car that could blend into the crowd. After a brief exchange, he hung up, feeling a slight smile form. 𝐒𝐼𝐴 was truly an amazing guy and the best servant one could ask for. His quirk, known as perfection, allowed him to perform tasks flawlessly, but it came with limitations and drawbacks, classifying it as an ordinary type quirk, not suited for hero work. In just 2 minutes, 𝐒𝐼𝐴 arrived in a small black Toyota Mini, a model from 2 years ago. 𝐬𝐴 waved goodbye to the girls, promising to see them tomorrow, and hopped into the car with lightning speed. Once on the road, he muttered to himself about how close that had been. 𝐒𝐼𝐴 sat patiently, a knowing smile on his face, prompting 𝐬𝐴 to finally drop his facade. He slumped back in the seat, loosening his tie and removing his blazer and shirt in one smooth motion, revealing a black tank top and tightly bound bandages from Recovery Girl. Changing clothes in a car was no easy task, but he managed to slip into black jeans and pull a shirt over his head. 𝐒𝐼𝐴, noticing his injuries, asked if he should arrange an appointment with their MSTR healer. 𝐬𝐴 shook his head while pulling on a dark red blazer that had been thoughtfully placed in the car and changing into a pair of black sneakers. Finally, he clipped his knives and fully loaded gun onto his belt. When they stopped at a traffic light, 𝐒𝐼𝐴 asked where he should be taken. 𝐬𝐴, feeling impatient, commanded him to take him to the bar for his meeting, reminding him not to call him young. 𝐒𝐼𝐴 merely smirked in response. It felt great to let the mask down for a bit. The mind wandered over to the meeting, and a smirk crept onto the face, eager to unsettle the hero killer. While there was disagreement with his philosophy of eliminating anyone who didn't embody the title of hero, his usefulness was undeniable. To him, any hero who sought the spotlight or pursued personal ambitions, aside from All Might, deserved to be removed. This ideology could be easily twisted to their advantage, as there was a shared belief in questioning these figures, uncovering their motives, drives, and backstories, examining what they did and why they did it. If they were deemed undeserving, they would be treated as the villains they were. The approach involved slowly dismantling their pride, humbling them, and exposing their flaws. Then came the moment of revelation about the twisted nature of the world they lived in. Questions would arise, asking if they understood and wished to join the cause. Most did. If persuasion failed, their fate was left to their own choices: join or continue living a lie. By the end of these encounters, many found themselves pleading for an end to their suffering. This method had been in practice for over 13 years, dating back to the meeting of the Father and All for One. 𝐒𝐼𝐴 stopped in front of a shabby, run-down bar that looked far better on the inside, designed to blend in with the surroundings. Inside, it exuded a classy, almost Victorian vibe, a modern retro aesthetic with rich woods, repurposed antiques, and modern technology. Entering in a frantic hurry, it became clear that arriving half an hour early was a trick played by 𝐒𝐻𝐽𝐴, something that should have been expected. Toga flung herself at the newcomer, her grip strong and playful, spinning around as if dragging along her favorite toy. Finally stopping, she revealed her new favorite accessory, a backpack-like contraption with 2 durable glass cylinders, large needles, and translucent pink tubes for BLD extraction. She was thrilled with the adjustable speed settings, and the cute cat design pockets for her knives suited her motif perfectly, cute yet deadly. Dabi, with a provocative smile, reminded Toga that Izuku should be referred to as boss or reaper while present. In jest, a playful retort about calling Dabi by his real name led to a reluctant admission of defeat from him. Moving on, attention turned to the newest member, Twice, who had joined a few months prior, seeking reliable companionship and a potential cure for his self-inflicted mental struggles. A hug for 𝐒𝐻𝐽𝐴 led to a playful dog pile, filled with laughter, video games, and light-hearted banter, until the atmosphere shifted with the arrival of Stain. 𝐒𝐻𝐽𝐴 straightened everyone up, and mental preparation began for the encounter. 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 was known for his twisted nature, but perhaps they all shared that trait. As Toga welcomed the hero killer, her eerie enthusiasm brought a chuckle. She announced that today was special, the day he would meet the true mastermind behind everything. 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 remained unfazed, even as he was led into the ominous meeting room, which featured an intimidating black swivel chair and a large desk, all bathed in ghostly green light from a chandelier that resembled a torture device. With a commanding presence, the figure instructed 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 to sit, and he begrudgingly complied. The title of hero killer was acknowledged, but the preference was to call him by his real name. A scoff from 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 indicated his reluctance to share it, but the underlying threat was clear: know your place. The atmosphere thickened with 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲's emotions, fear, anger, shock, and a strong undercurrent of bloodlust. A quick remedy for the tension could be found in a swift action, but for now, the focus remained on the conversation. When 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 reacted in disbelief at the presence of a child, the mood shifted dramatically. The figure appeared behind him in an instant, eyes glowing with a promise of pain. A warning was issued about the consequences of disrespect, met with defiance from 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲. The response was chilling, a twisted smile forming as the figure declared the intention to silence him. With a carefree demeanor, the figure returned to the desk, ready to delve into business, flipping through files without a glance at 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲, the atmosphere thick with tension and anticipation. Just this week, he had eliminated 16 individuals from their list. They weren't all heroes. One was a cruel scientist who had experimented on children, another a corrupt diplomat, and a few others from the government who had lost their way. The rest were heroes, selfish and corrupted individuals who had broken both morality and the law, the true criminals. The speaker acknowledged the accomplishment, noting that despite initial doubts, the task had been completed without issue. They placed the file in a drawer and presented a new list, which piqued his interest. He picked it up, flipped through it, and nodded sharply. Those were the only individuals he was permitted to target. Once he had completed this list, he would return for his final order, and only then would he receive the promised compensation. The speaker offered a bright smile that felt unsettling, as it contrasted sharply with the atmosphere. A warning was issued. The individuals on that list were the only ones he could harm. Any deviation would not be tolerated. The speaker's glare intensified, recalling a previous incident where he had acted against instructions. For that, his payment would be reduced. He nodded slowly, and the speaker dismissed him with a wave of their hand. Once he was gone, they retrieved a white box from a desk drawer and opened it carefully. The contents were precious, and any harm to them would lead to dire consequences. Inside the dimly lit room, a pair of glowing cat-like eyes pierced the darkness, reflecting a mix of boredom and curiosity. A lone light bulb swung gently from the ceiling, casting an eerie glow over the cracked concrete floor. The silence felt heavy, a tense pause before an impending storm. Suddenly, a high-pitched scream echoed through the room, shifting the expression in the eyes from pain to fear. The screaming ceased, replaced by a manic glint and a wide, unsettling grin. The figure began to hum softly, the sound of metal clinking and something being sharpened filled the air, rendering the observer motionless. After what felt like an eternity, a click broke the silence, and a dim light illuminated the space, adding to the chilling atmosphere. The eyes narrowed in disgust, glaring at an unseen presence in the corner. With a swift motion, she turned and grasped a weapon left on the table. It was a knife, beautifully crafted. The ebony handle was intricately carved to resemble a crow's claw, while the tarnished silver blade featured a pattern of brambles that seemed to constrict the metal. The blade's tip was curved, ready for action. The girl giggled childishly and crept down the wooden halls of the abandoned house. The discolored rose wallpaper peeled from the thin plaster walls, and the splintering floorboards posed a safety hazard. Holes in the roof allowed lichen-covered tiles to fall, but she was unfazed. It was shelter, a place to rest. She skipped outside into the streets, and the observer felt an irresistible urge to follow her. Her white hair shimmered in the dreary moonlight, veiled by clouds. The summer night felt drowsy, as the townspeople slept soundly. She picked up a rusty pipe and dragged it across the concrete, producing a piercing sound that sent dogs howling. She danced into the town center, letting out a deranged chuckle as her quirk toyed with her mind and body. Then she began to sing, her voice echoing eerily through the streets. The melody was unsettling, and as she marched in a circle, she continued with a haunting rendition. The words flowed with an unsettling cadence, drawing the attention of the waking townsfolk. People began to gather, entranced by her voice. The observer felt a sense of urgency to intervene, but it was futile. The girl continued her song, her tone shifting to something ancient and warped, as she began to organize the crowd into smaller groups, assessing them with a chilling precision. With a swift motion, she seized a young woman from the first group and dragged her away into the night. In a sudden jolt, the observer awoke from a nightmare, memories flooding back in a chaotic whirlwind. The haunting image of the broken girl they had failed to save lingered in their mind. Breathing deeply, they tried to calm themselves, rocking back and forth. Just then, the alarm blared, cutting through the silence like a siren. Heart racing, they scrambled around the room, searching for the source of the noise. It was in their shoe charging. Once silenced, a realization struck. They had spent the entire night at the bar. The thought faded to the background as worry and fear overwhelmed him once again. He scolded himself to calm down while pacing around the small, Spartan room, a blanket draped over his shoulders. Eventually, his heart settled back to its rightful place. He slowly emerged from the thick, woolen blanket and made his way across the hall to the shared bathroom. Grabbing his comb from the sink, he attempted to tame his unruly hair with it and some hot water, but it was futile. With no gel left and all his other products back at the dorms, he sighed and slipped the comb into his robe's pocket. With nothing else to do, he fiddled with his hair, trying to adjust to his new eyebrow piercing, which he couldn't quite remember how he had acquired. Using his fingers, he tugged at the knots, hoping to create a puffy cloud effect. Thankfully, his long fringe covered the piercing, as he had no idea how else to hide it. Semi-satisfied with his appearance, he shuffled back to his room. He slipped into his oversized uniform and struggled to tie his tie, which proved to be oddly challenging. Finishing his morning routine, he layered concealer over his scars and dark circles. Before heading downstairs, he put on a naive, carefree smile and a determined mindset. He raced downstairs to grab some cereal before anyone else could eat it all. To his surprise, only 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 was present. Checking his phone, he realized it was only 6 o'clock. School started at 8:30. He hadn't needed to rush, and another sigh escaped his lips. He plopped down on one of the bar stools and muttered a good morning to 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽, who waved a tendril of mist in response before returning to his book. Eating his Cheerios in silence, he left the empty bowl on the counter, waved goodbye to 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽, and headed for the door. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 called out, asking if he wanted a ride, but he shook his head with a rueful smile, saying he would walk since he had time. He winked and slipped out the door before 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 could respond. As he strolled down the dusty street, he took in his surroundings. It wasn't a pretty sight, but it was familiar, as he had lived in 𝗏𝗏𝗏 for most of his life. The bar was located downtown, while his childhood home was in the upper town, which, though not much compared to the city, was clean and had decent facilities. His signature red, oversized sneakers slapped noisily against the empty road. Though people were awake and bustling about, most preferred to remain unseen. The sun had fully risen, bathing the shanty town in a golden glow that made the dreary place appear almost picturesque. He paused to admire the beauty, watching the light reflect off the tin roofs and cast shadows of the crooked buildings onto the cold street. It felt philosophical, walking into the light and leaving the darkness behind. He made it to the city proper at 7 on the dot, walked to the metro station, bought a ticket, and hopped on the next train. Everything was going smoothly until it wasn't. A voice in the crowd called out, recognizing him from the sports festival. Once again, he found himself awkwardly smiling as a crowd formed around him, showering him with praise and questions. He felt like a rag doll being tugged by toddlers. When he finally managed to escape onto the platform, his clothes were rumpled, his hair was messy, and he was out of breath. He muttered to himself about the overwhelming attention while leaning against a pillar, catching curious glances from passers-by. Once the moment passed, he began the 20-minute walk to school. He fixed his hair and smoothed down the creases in his uniform as he walked. Arriving outside the grand and extravagant building of 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐬𝐵, he felt he looked half decent at least. It was still early, so he didn't have to worry about 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴, who remained suspicious of him, or too many students. He tiptoed through the long hallways, and after what felt like hours, finally reached his locker. He collected his books and emptied his bag of unnecessary items for the first few lessons. Wandering around, he eventually found himself at the comically large door of Class 1A and opened it quietly. To his disappointment, he wasn't the first to arrive. Their usual group was already there, likely having come in an hour earlier, even though school didn't start for another 45 minutes. Bakugo, Kirishima, Sato, Momo, and Kodo were present. He quickly scanned the room, a habit he hadn't been able to shake since his time in the slums. He practically skipped to his desk and placed his small shoulder bag down. Then he approached Ida's desk. He greeted him with a jovial smile, and Ida responded politely while putting his book down. He expressed his condolences about Ida's brother, acknowledging the horrible situation and urging him not to seek revenge. Ida visibly tensed at the mention of it, and he understood how Ida felt. He had also sought vengeance, but it had proven unfulfilling and consuming. After a long silence, Ida assured him it wasn't his fault and that he would be fine. But deep down, he felt guilt wash over him, knowing that Tensei was out of commission because of Stain, who had only been there because he had ordered it. On the other hand, despite my anger towards him, 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐬𝐵 wasn't on the list. I had made it clear that for the time being he could only target those on the list, otherwise, I couldn't provide him with what he desired, more quirks. Although he despises arrogant power seekers, he is one himself, which is quite hypocritical, but I suppose everyone has their contradictions. Just as I was about to respond, the shrill bell echoed through the halls. I offered him a small apologetic smile and made my way to my seat on the other side of the classroom. The door swung open, and the sleep-deprived caterpillar made his entrance, wrapped in his scruffy yellow sleeping bag. He shuffled to his desk, shedding his second skin before picking up a small remote. Mr. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴 suched on his computer, and a projector descended from the ceiling. He began, stating that the sports festival had concluded and that we must have noticed our rising popularity. Kaminari joked about feeling like celebrities, only to receive a marker shot at his forehead. Mr. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴 growled, warning him not to interrupt again, his gaze fierce and reminiscent of the most notorious villains. He continued, explaining that our increased popularity marked the beginning of the next step in our journey, internships. He smirked and displayed a chart on the screen, revealing the offers we had received. Todoroki, the runner-up, had received the most offers by far, while Bakugo, the winner, came in second. I had garnered the third most votes, followed by Tokoyami, Mina, Uraraka, and Ida. Some of my classmates wore distraught expressions. Mr. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴 reassured us that more offers were still coming in, and even if we didn't receive any, there were agencies available for volunteers and interns. Just as he was about to elaborate, the bell rang again, and the tension in the room was palpable. He cleared his throat, announcing that there was something we needed to do before our internships: choose hero names. Class A froze, their minds racing with thoughts of tests, pop quizzes, or assessments. Mr. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴 informed us that someone else would be leading this class, and that someone was none other than the R-rated hero, Midnight. The class erupted in cheers, though I noticed Mineta muttering inappropriate things to himself in the corner. Midnight explained that a hero's name defines a hero, and it could be a temporary choice or a lifelong identity. She handed out white bards to everyone. Aoyama was the first to present his name, which was as ridiculous and glittery as I had anticipated. Midnight declared it perfect, suggesting a slight modification. I buried my head in my hands, overwhelmed by embarrassment at the absurdity. Midnight eagerly scanned the crowd for the next volunteer, and I reluctantly raised my hand. After hours of contemplation and even a meeting dedicated to it, I had settled on a name that was heroic yet meaningful. I approached the podium, offering a nervous smile as I revealed my choice. The class gasped in surprise. Ida exclaimed that he thought the name was an insult. I nodded, smiling warmly, and declared that from now on, Deku would be the name of a hero. Midnight approved, noting that it sounded like, "You can do it," in Japanese. After I returned to my seat, I rested my head on my desk, but soon Mr. Aizawa entered and requested my presence for the remainder of the lesson. Midnight looked puzzled, but Aizawa remained tight-lipped. She urged me to go with him in a playful tone. I sprang up, giving him my best bunny smile, which melted the hearts of those around me, but Mr. Aizawa briskly walked out, prompting me to hurry after him. Something felt off. He was moving with unusual speed. My worry grew as I considered the possibilities of what could be wrong. He abruptly stopped at the principal's office and opened the door. My heart raced, and I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me. I was about to be questioned by Detective 𝗧𝗜𝗧𝗟𝗘, known for his ability to detect lies. How was I going to navigate this situation? Principal 𝗍𝐻𝗂 gestured for me to take a seat, his polite demeanor juxtaposed with an unsettling intensity. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I sat in the small, uncomfortable chair designed to make me feel small and vulnerable. He stared directly at him, as if peering into his very soul, while adjusting something on his desk. Due to the low height of the chair, he couldn't see what it was. He struggled to maintain his composure under the intense gaze, clinging to the act that had become second nature. Yet 𝗍𝐻𝗂 knew. Somehow, he sensed the truth, and all he needed now was some proof. The analogy of cat and mouse felt inadequate. 𝗍𝐻𝗂 was more like a cunning fox, and he was the vulnerable bunny caught in its trap. The thought of escape seemed futile. He quickly dismissed that line of thinking. No, he wasn't the rabbit. He was the hunter using a defenseless bunny as bait. A wolf in sheep's clothing. He was no longer a helpless boy. He asked if this was about the stain incident, but 𝗍𝐻𝗂 shook his head. He stammered, pretending ignorance about the situation, hiding the malicious and cunning figure that lurked beneath his fearful expression. The principal's response was ambiguous, hinting that the outcome would determine the next steps. Principal 𝗍𝐻𝗂 was a remarkable being. An animal who had developed a quirk granting him intelligence that surpassed most humans, making him a valuable asset to the hero community. Unlike others who had been experimented on, 𝗍𝐻𝗂 had developed his quirk independently, allowing him to outsmart any adversary. Unfortunately for 𝗍𝐻𝗂, he was not just any adversary. He was the Reaper, the mastermind behind the League of Villains and soon to be its leader, the son of 𝗒𝐻𝐽𝐻 and Lucifer, the king of the underworld, a revolutionary and activist. Bringing himself back to reality, he reminded himself of a crucial fact. Despite his legacy, he was on 𝗍𝐻𝗂's turf, playing by his rules. With 𝗍𝐻𝗂 pulling the strings, he couldn't outsmart or escape. He would have to navigate carefully, like a game of chess, where white always moved first. Aizawa's voice broke the silence, muttering from the shadows that this was necessary. His comment was meant to be private, but the stillness of the room made it audible to all. Finally, Detective 𝗧𝗜𝗧𝗟𝗘, known for his ability to detect lies, was ready. His quirk wasn't infallible, it operated on a majority concept. If most of the story was true, it would signal to 𝗧𝗜𝗧𝗟𝗘 that it was entirely truthful, even if it wasn't. This was a potential advantage, but he had to tread carefully. 𝗧𝗜𝗧𝗟𝗘 was aware of this flaw and relied on his detective skills to compensate. He didn't know the exact ratio of truth to deception, so he would need to test the waters carefully. If he answered all their questions truthfully, the ordeal would conclude swiftly. The detective began with simple questions, aiming to ease him into a false sense of security. He played along, stating that he believed he was born in Shizuoka Public Hospital, while being mindful of his body language, a lesson from Kurojiiri. When 𝗧𝗜𝗧𝗟𝗘 noted that his mother was deceased and inquired about her death, he felt a wave of horror wash over him. They were moving their pieces strategically, trying to draw him out. Taking a deep breath, he prepared to counter. He mentioned that she had passed away in the hospital due to a deadly disease, but that was a lie. When pressed for the truth, he admitted that she had indeed died in a hospital, but not from cancer. There had been a fire, and they couldn't save her in time. His voice trembled, and a somber mood filled the room. 𝗍𝐻𝗂 cleared his throat, breaking the tension, and the detective moved on to the next question about who had cared for him after his mother's death. 𝗧𝗜𝗧𝗟𝗘 observed him closely, noting his fearful demeanor, which suggested he might not be suited for a hero's life. He spoke of being sent to a foster home in 𝗏𝗏𝗟, where his guardian was 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴𝐮𝐸𝐵𝐸. His voice quivered as he recalled his experiences, gripping the plastic chair tightly. 𝗎𝐻𝐻 watched him intently, aware of what he needed to hear. He continued, revealing that his foster father had not been a good person. After losing his job, he turned to drinking, forcing him to take on odd jobs and eventually drop out of school. He feigned distress over this, though it was not as painful as it seemed. He had spent little time at the home and had worked to provide for himself. 𝗎𝐻's eyes flickered with curiosity and a hint of pity, but he quickly suppressed it, knowing that emotions could cloud judgment. He mentioned that he had self-studied and trained whenever possible, a statement that was true. Their blank expressions betrayed a flicker of interest. They wanted to know more but needed to continue with their questioning. "That's a piece for me." The detective inquired about the marks on my body, clearly trying to uncover the mystery behind them. I hesitated, recalling the past. Most of those marks were from bullies, accidents, and the rough environment I grew up in. I explained that fights and beatings were common, and anyone from 𝗏𝗏𝗟 would understand that it was nearly impossible to leave without scars. I also mentioned the intense training I underwent with my quirk, which had left its own marks. Then, the detective pressed on, asking about my relationship with the League of Villains. At that moment, I froze, disbelief washing over me. I jumped to my feet, feeling cornered. I fidgeted with my watch, a smart band that controlled various devices I carried. Luck seemed to be on my side. I had a special gadget in my blazer pocket. I discreetly entered a code that released a colorless, scentless gas designed to nullify quirks, something our new recruit had created. The detective repeated his question, his tone suggesting he thought I was being evasive. I stared at him, trying to comprehend why he would accuse me of being associated with villains. I stammered, expressing my confusion and frustration. Just because I had a difficult childhood didn't mean I was a villain. I pointed out that many heroes had faced worse circumstances and still made it. I had always dreamed of attending UA and becoming a hero, but I had been told I couldn't. I had worked harder than anyone to be here, and I pleaded with them not to dismiss me based on my past. The principal, 𝗎𝐻, bluntly stated their suspicions regarding my behavior and my tendency to sneak out at night. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. I explained that my lack of information stemmed from my upbringing, where paperwork was often neglected. I gazed out the large window behind 𝗎𝐻's desk, trying to find the right words. The detective interrupted my thoughts, asking about my late-night outings. I explained that I had gone to retrieve my foster father from a pub after the owner called me, concerned about his behavior. I often checked on him, and sometimes I couldn't do it on weekends. I reassured them that I had been back before curfew after visiting a friend on campus. My words were carefully chosen to be truthful, just lacking in detail. The detective sighed, appearing defeated, while the principal leaned back in his chair, accepting my explanation but clearly skeptical. He reminded me that I hadn't answered the original question. I knew the gas was working, scrambling their quirks and slowing their thinking. It was time to make my move. I let out a small chuckle, trying to ease the tension, and stated that I had never heard of the League of Villains before their attack on us. The principal dismissed me, thanking me after receiving a nod from the detective, who looked weary. I nodded slowly and made my way to the door, my head down and body trembling. Just as I was about to leave, 𝗎𝐻's voice whispered in my ear, warning me that while a person's personality may be complex, their behavior is predictable. He added that mine was not. I froze, feeling a chill run down my spine as I exited his office, catching a glimpse of the detective's concerned expression. That was a subtle threat. 𝗎𝐻 knew something, but he couldn't prove it. As I stepped outside, I recalled placing a bug under the chair in the office. I focused on the voices drifting from inside. The detective asked if I had been truthful, to which 𝗎𝐻 replied that only time would tell. I didn't linger any longer outside the office and quickly returned to class. The game was on. We had both made our moves. Who would break the stalemate first? The end-of-school bell rang, and I found myself heading over to the library, my mind buzzing with countless thoughts. One of those thoughts was in my hand at that moment. I stared intensely at the piece of paper I had just received in the final PRD, Confusion and contemplation etched on my face. Which agency should I choose? A hand slapped me on the shoulder from behind, causing me to flinch at the sudden touch. 𝗧𝗓𝗏 apologized, clearly not meaning to startle me. When I didn't respond, she asked if I was okay, noting that I had seemed off since returning from Principal 𝗬𝐬𝐴's office. Concern radiated from her eyes. I glanced at her, willing tears to form, which sent her into a panic. She looked to 𝗬𝗏 for help, but he appeared just as unsure. I whispered that they thought I was a villain, my voice hoarse. Their expressions changed, realizing the seriousness of the accusation. I expressed my lifelong dream of becoming a hero, wanting to save people. I had worked tirelessly, training and studying to stand on these grounds. I recounted how I had clawed my way up from rock bottom, juggling multiple jobs to afford everything needed for the entrance exam. My emotions surged, and I could see guilt on the faces of my friends. Then, a miracle happened. I got into UA, and a private benefactor covered my tuition, dorm room, and even offered me a job. Life seemed to be looking up. I made friends, learned from actual heroes, and experienced things I had only ever dreamed of. But, of course, it felt too good to last. They thought I was a villain simply because of my past and where I had come from. My voice cracked as I spoke, and I found myself enveloped in their comforting embrace. It was relaxing to be surrounded by friends, knowing things they didn't, which gave me a sense of calm. We marched into the library side by side, tears dried and a moment shared. They wore innocent smiles, while I felt a mix of emotions inside. We settled at an empty table and grabbed some recommended books for further study, knowing we needed to learn them thoroughly. As I mumbled to myself about the properties of chemical compounds, I noticed a call from 𝗧𝗏. It was unusual for him to call, as he often said it wasn't a butler's way to command his When I answered, my dad's laughter came through the line. I held back my excitement, wanting to raise any suspicions. He mentioned that I should choose alpha agencies for my internships, as they were supporters and would assist with my training. He also noted that the boss was an old friend of his. I felt a mix of terror and excitement at the thought of meeting someone connected to my dad's past. My phone buzzed with a reminder, and I realized I had training with 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗟𝗘 in 20 minutes. I had completely forgotten. I sprinted out of the library without explaining myself to 𝗧𝗓𝗏 and 𝗬𝗏, skidding into my dorm room to change into workout clothes. I grabbed my duffel bag, stuffing it with water bottles, a towel, a first aid kit, and deodorant. As I rushed out, I suddenly remembered I had forgotten my card. Groaning, I turned back to retrieve it. Upon entering my room, I spotted the training guide I had prepared for 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗟𝗘 still on my desk. I quickly threw it into a plastic packet and added it to my bag, relieved I had come back. With my card in hand, I dashed over to the General Studies dorm building, which was on the other side of the school. By the time I arrived, I was red in the face and breathing. I glanced at my watch and felt a surge of relief. I was just on time. I took a moment to catch my breath and waited for my new student, eager to inspire loyalty and gratitude in him. He had immense potential, and I was determined to help him harness his power. He was my clay, and I was the potter. After a tiring training session the previous day, I realized it had been a while since I had done basic training with someone. I staggered across my dorm room to the tiny bathroom, only to discover that my concealer was finished. Frustrated, I threw on an oversized dark hoodie, hoping to avoid any unwanted conversations. I grabbed my recent notebook and smart pen, along with my well-worn backpack, stuffing it with essentials and workout clothes. I put on my running shoes, grabbed my earphones and phone, and prepared for my internship. Most students had already left, but I had been instructed to come in casual clothes. I added sunglasses and pulled my hood down before locking the door behind me and activating my personal security system. Upon entering the support class, I was greeted by an enthusiastic 𝗬𝐴, who had countless inventions she wanted me to try and give feedback on. I chuckled at her upbeat attitude but explained that I couldn't stay today. She was heading to her internship today, with her train leaving in an hour. She needed to collect her new suit. A wide smile spread across her face, almost as if it might crack her cheeks. She bounded over to her cluttered work table, swamped with projects, and dug through the mess until she finally retrieved a silver suitcase. Gratefully, she smiled and said her goodbyes. Arriving at the station, she found it as busy as usual. She settled onto the uncomfortable waiting benches, plugged in her earphones, and let the music wash over her as her thoughts drifted. Finally, the train arrived, and she hurried on board, narrowly avoiding being trampled by tired workers and excited tourists. To her surprise, she managed to find an almost empty cart, allowing her to breathe freely. She pulled her hood up, turned her music back on, and prepared for a long ride. When she opened her eyes, she realized she had arrived at Keeda, Tokyo, where Alpha Agencies was located. It was close to Hosu, which was why her father had suggested she come here to check up on the hero killer and Tamura. She wandered out of the station, pulled up the address, and searched on her GPS. Following the directions, she stopped in front of a massive building that could rival skyscrapers. Its extravagance was a stark contrast to the rest of the street, making her feel a bit embarrassed. With a sigh, she entered the lobby, which looked more like a five-star hotel than a hero agency. Plush red carpets, crisp white walls, and oak paneling surrounded her, with a towering steel statue of a wolf standing proudly in the center. She was spotted by Alpha's main sidekicks, Okami and Beta. Rolling her eyes at their names, she smiled at them, unsure if everyone who worked there was an ally or just Alpha. To play it safe, she introduced herself in a nervous tone, stating that she was 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐬𝐵𝐷, a student from UA interning there. They simply stared at her. The sidekicks led her to an elevator, and they stood in silence as they traveled to the 67th floor. Okami broke the silence, her caramel eyes analyzing her. She asked if Izuku was really Hisashi's child, causing her to startle. It seemed they were aware of her background. Letting her nervous facade drop, she straightened up and allowed a confident expression to take over her features. With a hint of mischief in her voice, she confirmed her identity and grinned smugly. The sidekicks seemed taken aback by her sudden change in demeanor. It appeared they were puzzled about why a villain's child was at the top hero school in the world. The elevator dinged, signaling their arrival at the top floor. As the doors opened, she prepared herself for the sight of the great Alpha, currently the number 5 hero, who had held the title of number 1 hero for 10 years before All Might. She wondered how old he was, around 63, she guessed, and likely retiring soon. However, his sidekicks could easily take over for him, and he was still active, so he must be in good shape. Opening her eyes, she found Alpha nowhere to be seen. On guard, she scanned the area, noticing only a single door and the elevator. Cautiously, she creaked open the door to reveal a simple yet sophisticated office. At the end of the large room sat a metal desk, behind which was a white leather swivel chair. Tiptoeing forward, she turned the chair around to find a man smaller than average, with white hair and gray stubble lining his round face. Wrinkles adorned his features, and a claw scar crossed his cheek. Yellowed fangs peeked out from beneath his chapped lips, and tufts of fur adorned his elongated ears. She poked him gently. Sir, are you alive?" she asked, her tone bored. He startled awake, looking around frantically until his eyes settled on her. "Ah, so you are Izuku, I presume," he yawned, rising from his chair. She nodded, taking in his appearance. He was slightly taller than her, not overly muscular, and looked younger than his age, though not exactly young. He wore a simple black tracksuit and tattered sneakers, with a tarnished moon pendant around his neck. "You look just like her," Alpha remarked suddenly, catching her off guard. She was confused, wondering whom he meant. "You are a perfect mixture of both your parents. You have Inko's green hair and pale skin, but Hisashi's unruly hairstyle, brilliant green eyes, and his rather dangerous curiosity," he observed, ruffling her hair. Tears threatened to spill as she realized he had known her mother. "Not very well, I'm afraid, but since I was the closest thing Hisashi had to family, I attended the wedding." He would talk endlessly about his precious Inko and how much he wanted to marry her, Alpha said, his eyes glistening with emotion. After a moment of silence, he added softly, "I was there at your beer too." She managed a weak smile. He shook his head. "But you are not here to reminisce. You are here to train and learn, and that is what you shall do." He flashed her a predatory grin. In that moment, she knew this would be an unforgettable week. She was leaping between buildings, her new suit blending perfectly with the surroundings. They were playing a game of capture the flag on the outskirts of 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽. As always, May had done a fantastic job. The suit was comfortable, allowing her to move easily, and it looked great too. I hid behind a building when I heard a ghostly howl, signaling that one of the hounds was closing in. The purpose of this little game was to improve my speed and extend the duration I could use my quirk, as the longer I could maintain it, the better my chances of success. After meeting with Alpha, we had discussed areas for improvement, including my control over the quirk and some new techniques. The first new trick I planned to practice involved stockpiling my energy to the point where I could move so quickly that I seemed to phase from one place to another. Theoretically, this would make it difficult for anyone to land a hit on me, but I was uncertain if I could actually pull it off. Suddenly, I heard the thumping of footsteps, at least 5 people. I quickly moved from my hiding spot and raced toward the next abandoned building. As I caught my breath, I unfolded the indestructible piece of aluminum paper that contained the instructions for the game, all written in code. My next token should be nearby. I searched for the logo of Alpha Agencies, a crescent moon inside a paw print. Finding it, I whispered to myself in excitement, but even my soft voice echoed in the desolate offices. I cursed my carelessness. The hounds definitely heard that. I grabbed the paw, which was slightly smaller than my palm. This was the last one. With no time to waste, I checked the last location on my map, which was in 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽, about 13 kilometers away. I powered up my quirk, feeling the energy surge through my veins as I sped toward the finish line. My pursuers were hot on my tail, reminding me of the times in the slums when my friends and I were often chased by angry citizens or entire gangs. A smile crept onto my face at the memories. I accelerated, eventually losing them in the alleyways before climbing to the rooftops. My internal GPS informed me that I had arrived in 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽, leaving just 1 kilometer to my destination. I leaped over buildings and streets, catching the attention of some people below. They speculated about my identity, wondering if I was a new hero or perhaps a sidekick. As I approached the final stretch, I shouted to myself, feeling like a character in a shounen anime. That was when I spotted it, the ruby-red flag fluttering atop what appeared to be an old factory. I fell and rolled onto the roof, quickly snatching the flag before anyone else could. Once it was in my grasp, I sprang to my feet and surveyed my surroundings. A deep voice from behind me remarked that I was late. I smirked and turned to face my temporary teacher. He wore his tribal-style hero costume, which still fit him perfectly after all these years, likely due to some alterations over time. I stated matter-of-factly that I had arrived before sundown, as per the objective of the game. A low chuckle escaped his lips in response. I grinned and jumped down, grabbing onto the telephone wires to swing safely to the ground without using my quirk. Alpha landed beside me, breaking the ground with his impact. I teased him about showing off, knowing he heard me, but he didn't react. Instead, he asked what I wanted to do next. I smirked, revealing that I had an acquaintance who was about to face off against someone else, and I simply had to watch. It would be entertaining. Alpha gave me a chilling smile, one that suited a villain, as he was the only one at the agency who knew I was the leader of the league. I perched on a nearby rooftop, ready for the show. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 charged recklessly at the hero killer, shouting about avenging his brother. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 regarded him with a mix of pity and annoyance, dismissing 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 as a fake hero seeking revenge. The two engaged in a tense game of cat and mouse, and I couldn't help but think that 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 better not kill 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽, as that would violate the rules I had set. Eventually, the confrontation escalated, and 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 was injured. As 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 prepared to deliver a final blow, I felt a surge of urgency. I couldn't let this happen. I noticed 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽's inner turmoil. As much as I would love to recruit a new hero-turned-villain, I didn't want him consumed by revenge. I jumped down from my perch, landing just above 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽. His eyes widened in surprise as he dropped his sword, and I fixed him with a cold stare. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽, struggling to rise, called out in desperation, claiming he wanted to end 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽. I rebuked him, reminding him that heroes save people, not end their lives. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 smiled at me, declaring that while I would no longer give him what he wanted, ending me would be worth it. He lunged forward with his remaining sword, but I dashed beneath him and snatched the weapon that lay forgotten on the ground. I licked my lips, trying to devise a plan. 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 made the first move, and I bounced off the walls, kicking his back. He stumbled but quickly regained his balance. Defeating him alone seemed impossible, especially in his territory. I couldn't call anyone from the League, that would raise too many suspicions. Dodging another of his attacks, I led him deeper into the alleyway. I considered contacting Alpha, but doing so would alert 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲. I knew he would see it as a test of my abilities and would not help me without a challenge. Most of my high-power moves were off-limits, as they would draw too much attention from 𝐒𝐮𝐴. Analysis wasn't providing any strategies that would allow me to keep my cover, which felt like a significant handicap. I thought about calling another hero, but there were no others in the area, and I really didn't want to do that. Then an idea struck me. I leaped onto one of the fire escapes, and 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲, followed, waving his sword around like a toy. While narrowly avoiding his dangerously sharp blade, I sent a message to 𝐒𝐿𝐴 using my emergency contact device embedded in my suit. The message was a bit scrambled but understandable. 𝐒𝐮𝐴 being nomis. Go crazy. A short while later, I gave 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 a chilling smile as I heard the screams of citizens and the shouts of heroes. Phase 1 was complete. 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 backed me into a corner, and I sent my location to my class using my personalized Nokia, which had all the functions of a modern phone but was sturdy enough not to break if dropped. I ignored 𝐒𝐮𝐴's frustrated shouts and angry comments as I pressed myself further against the wall. 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 swung his sword menacingly, staring at me like a rabid dog. He muttered about how annoying it was to discover that all his orders came from a kid pretending to be something he wasn't. I forced myself to swallow the fear rising in my throat and shot back a snarky comment, pointing out his hypocrisy. My words seemed to infuriate him, and he charged at me with a newfound fury in his eyes. It was a calculated rage, unlike Bakugo's reckless anger, and I knew I couldn't rely on him making a mistake. At that moment, I felt an absurd urge to laugh but fought it down. Just as 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 aimed to strike, a wall of blazing flames erupted between us, forcing him to skid to the side to avoid being burned. I turned to thank my savior, and to my surprise, it was Todoroki, my favorite ally. I smiled in relief. With Todoroki by my side, I no longer had to risk my cover. We fought 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 together, and it was much easier than facing him alone. 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲, annoyed by Todoroki's presence, unleashed a string of profanities. I took the opportunity to jab him in the stomach and slam him against the mucky brick wall, remnants of previous fights still clinging to it. Todoroki followed up with blasts of ice and fire. 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 dodged the flames and sliced through the ice as if he were playing a game. Together we fought, kicks, punches, fire, and ice. We held 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 back until 𝐒𝐮𝐴's paralysis wore off, allowing him to deliver a supercharged axe kick to 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐴's back, which knocked him out for good. It was fun while it lasted. I tied up 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 with the reinforced rope from my utility belt and cuffed him. I turned to 𝐒𝐮𝐴, checking on his injuries. He nodded, assuring me he was fine. I smiled, but then, with a swift motion, I hit him on the head, my eyes burning with intensity. That was for ignoring my warning about pursuing 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲. I hoped I knocked some sense into him. They laughed and I cracked a slightly annoyed smile. Suddenly, slow clapping echoed through the alleyway, and standing there was Alpha, a smirk on his face. He remarked on how it was about time I finished my little brawl, expressing doubt about my reputation. I rolled my eyes at his attempt to annoy me. He turned to leave but then asked if I was ready to go. I replied that we needed to drop off 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 first. Alpha sighed and approached the defeated hero. He asked where to take him, eyeing me closely. I gritted my teeth, wanting to punish 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 more, but I knew we couldn't drop him off at the police station without facing countless questions. I sighed, feeling defeated. I instructed Alpha to take him to the nearest police station but to do so discreetly. I then turned to my classmates, asking them to attend to Native while I called for an ambulance. They nodded and hurried off, eager to avoid any more interaction with my temporary mentor. The rest of the night blurred into a whirlwind of red, white, blue, random faces, and flurries of questions. Exhaustion and BLD loss began to set in, and I couldn't stand the noise any longer. I left the scene for a walk, seeking clarity in the chaos. A foolish idea, but still, it was necessary. As I walked, I could have sworn I heard another pair of footsteps behind me, but I couldn't pinpoint their source. I turned around frantically, feeling like I was searching for a hidden threat. The pounding in my head intensified, making it hard to think clearly. A familiar voice, laced with amusement, called out, reminding me of someone I thought was long gone. The name, Sparky, echoed in my mind, and I felt a rush of disbelief. Could it really be him? My breath quickened, and dizziness washed over me. Suddenly, my body could no longer hold up, and I collapsed. The voice called out in distress as heavy footsteps approached, growing closer until they reached me. I caught glimpses of yellow and hints of black. It didn't make sense. Sparky had dark brown hair. My vision blurred, and I lost consciousness. When I awoke the next morning, I found myself face to face with the chief of Hosu's police. He was neither an ally nor a friend to me or my father, so I braced myself for the inevitable consequences. He was aware that we had apprehended 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽, and our scent was all over him, making it easy for him to connect the dots. Fortunately, we managed to avoid severe repercussions, as the credit went to Endeavor and Alpha. I was relieved. If word got out that mere students had defeated 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽, the press would swarm me, and I wouldn't have a moment's peace, though I barely had any to begin with. After the half-dog, half-human chief of police left, the three of us survivors chatted about trivial matters, food, our internships, and the one thing I had completely forgotten, exams. After an hour of conversation, we were ordered to get some much-needed rest. As Ida and Todoroki drifted off, I lay awake, lost in thought. Sparky, my dear friend from childhood, who had been with me in the slums and traveled through the first 10 levels of the underground, was actually with me this whole year. Sparky was Kaminari. Exams were looming, and I had no real concern for them, but my classmates' anxiety began to seep into my own thoughts. Just a week away from the exams, we had returned from our internships only 3 days ago. When did the teachers expect us to study? It was no wonder everyone was on edge. Mr. Aizawa, looking worse for wear, announced that the pile of papers in his hands was our mock exams. I gripped my smart pen tightly, feeling it strain under my grasp as I pushed my worries aside. Sparky not coming to talk to me, Aizawa's watchful gaze, and the lingering threat of 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽's followers. I exhaled slowly, trying to center myself. Others around me were doing the same, though for different reasons. I glared at the crisp test paper before me, wishing it would spontaneously combust. I would have preferred to be doing anything else. Mr. Aizawa instructed us to begin reading, and after 5 minutes, we could start writing. He lumbered back to his desk, pulling out his tattered sleeping bag and promptly falling asleep. I couldn't help but wonder if he was some sort of vampire. Sighing, I returned my focus to the practice exam, skimming over the words with determination. Once the 5 minutes were up, I activated my smart pen and began to write at lightning speed, the ink flowing like a race car on the track. I raced through the first page with ease. After the exam ended, I leaned back in my chair, stretching to relieve the numbness in my hands. The smart pen was incredibly useful, but using it for extended PRDS left me feeling as if I had been hit by a train. The mock exam had concluded, and my classmates were quietly chatting, careful not to disturb our sleeping teacher. I examined the doodles on my desk, some of them mine, as thoughts swirled in my mind. Kaminari was Sparky. When was the next meeting? All for one wanted me to complete that paperwork soon. What did I need to do after school? I had training with Shigaraki that evening. I couldn't believe they were considering making him the successor instead of me. How had I missed it? They had the same face and quirk, just different coloring and character. I felt like an idiot. Suddenly, Bakugo shouted at me, his explosions barely contained as he shot me a glare. I quickly apologized, rubbing the back of my head. Bakugo was so easy to provoke. It was almost amusing. Then, ice-cold hands gripped my shoulders, sending a shiver down my spine. I turned to see Kaminari, the very person I wanted to talk to. I spoke casually, trying to keep the conversation low-key. He raised an eyebrow, and for a moment, I questioned if I was imagining things. But then he winked and flashed me a familiar smirk, and I knew I wasn't dreaming. Never mind then. The character pushed all true intentions and feelings aside, allowing themselves to be swept away by all things cute, innocent, and heroic. They felt a surge of gratitude and nervousness as they smiled at the boy, a soft blush tinting his ears and painting over his usual distracted expression, which they found endearing. They expressed their appreciation, wanting to thank him for his help. With enthusiasm, they suggested buying him lunch, beaming up at him. He stared blankly, trying to process the offer, clearly exhausted from the day's events. After a moment, he slowly considered the proposal, asking if he could choose anything. The character nodded, maintaining a wide smile. He agreed as long as they were paying. 𝗧𝗓𝗧𝗟𝗘, who had been listening in, face-bombed and grumbled at the boy, reminding him that he had already mentioned that. It seemed everyone was a bit drained. He looked at her with a puzzled expression, clearly not recalling that detail. 𝗧𝗓𝗧𝗟𝗘 groaned and slumped into her chair, while the boy shrugged, and the character giggled at their interaction. When the bell rang, Mr. 𝐒𝐮𝐽𝐻 jerked awake, glaring at the hallway as he begrudgingly shuffled out of his sleeping bag. He snapped at the class to leave, his grumpiness unusually pronounced that day. The class quickly exited, drawn by the tempting aroma wafting from the lunch hall, likely the result of lunch rush's skills. The character chuckled at their behavior while making their way there with a few others. Upon entering the cafeteria, their eyes scanned the larger-than-usual crowd for 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽𝐻. As expected, he was nowhere to be seen. With a groan, they slipped off their shoulder bag and rummaged for their wallet, shuffling through papers, doodles, and textbooks until they finally found it wedged between the pages of their political science textbook. Carefully, they took out their platinum card and swiped it across the scanner at the entrance. Lunch Rush glanced at his tablet upon hearing the noise and asked what they wanted. They selected 2 portions of the special. From across the hall, they noticed his surprise. They rarely used their card, but he remained silent and set aside 2 daily specials on a metal side table in the kitchen. Silently, they crept towards the side entrance of the kitchen, unnoticed. They dropped a couple of notes into the tip jar and quietly took their food. Balancing the trays, they walked toward a deserted table and set the food down. They messaged 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽𝐻 to let him know where to meet, their eyes scanning the crowd for him. After 15 minutes, frustration bubbled up as he had seen the message but hadn't responded. Drumming their fingers on the table, they sighed. Suddenly, a teasing voice from behind them broke the silence, commenting on their impatience. The character ground their teeth together, emotions threatening to boil over, but they managed to give him a sweet smile. They gently handed him his tray and then took his hand, gripping it tightly as they dragged him outside, where he wore a Cheshire grin, clearly trying to provoke them. They halted abruptly by an old oak tree at the back of the school, looking around to ensure no one was watching. With a relieved sigh, they plopped down on the freshly mown grass and opened their carton of strawberry milk, actually coffee, which they kept secret to maintain their image. As they took long sips of the glorious caffeine, 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽𝐻 gracefully sat down next to them, tearing into a slice of pizza. Not knowing how to start the conversation, they decided to initiate a light-hearted argument instead. They scoffed at his unchanged eating habits. He paused, glaring at them, and defended his choice, claiming it had been too long since he had proper pizza. He continued to rant, expressing disappointment that they hadn't asked how he was doing or what he had been up to over the years. Looking down, the character quietly muttered that he wouldn't have answered anyway. They took a deep breath, bottling up their emotions. After everything that had happened, how could they just have a normal conversation? Their voice broke as they spoke, tears streaming down their cheeks unbidden. They had been a team, partners who ruled the slums and faced the challenges of the underground together. Everything had been going well until trouble with a gang led to a devastating incident. They had thought he was gone forever, and now here he was, very much alive, yet he hadn't made a move toward them in the 2 months they had lived in the same building. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽𝐻 dropped his pizza and moved closer, pulling them into a hug. They wanted to protest but found themselves leaning into him instead. He whispered reassuringly, reminding them of their past and how they had made the impossible possible together. For a supposed genius, he really was clueless. The words tumbled out as I mumbled into his shirt, hiccuping occasionally. He reminisced about the time we had stuck the house guard's belongings to the ceiling, leaving him convinced he was upside down when he returned home. Even after years apart, he still knew how to lift my spirits, playing with my emotions like a skilled musician. Despite myself, I snorted and chuckled at the memory. The laughter came easily as I recalled how Prism had stayed behind to record the entire incident, and we had watched it repeatedly until the tape wore out. He flashed his signature charming smile, making my cheeks flush. When he sensed I was feeling better, he released me from his embrace, and we settled back against the tree, our shoulders brushing together. In comfortable silence, we gazed up at the overcast sky, pointing out shapes in the clouds and sharing a wordless connection. However, the tranquility was shattered when Kaminari broke the silence with a statement that sent a shiver down my spine, his tone hinting at mischief. He leaned closer, his voice low and inviting, and I felt a nervous gulp rise in my throat as I hesitated to respond. He placed his hand on my thigh, locking his gaze onto mine, and slowly moved his fingers upward. He confessed that he had grown to miss and love me more. Just like that, he leaned in, brushing his lips against mine before standing up and sauntering away, leaving me flustered and in emotional turmoil. He had played with my feelings, and while it wasn't entirely his fault, I couldn't bear to go through this again. At least he was back. I had missed him, and perhaps if I tried harder, he would stay. I hated him, but deep down, I knew that wasn't entirely true. Nothing ever went as planned when he was around, especially during his unpredictable moods. I had so many questions swirling in my mind. Where had he been? How did he escape? And how was he not just a shadow of his former self? I wanted to demand answers, but he always had a way of pulling me back into his games, and like a moth to a flame, I followed him until he grew bored and moved on to the next adventure. I pondered how the very traits that drew me to him were also the ones that pushed me away. I directed my thoughts to the clouds, but they remained silent. Uncurling from the ball I had unknowingly formed, I touched my lips and sighed, the words heavy in my throat. It seemed like it would be just like old times, and if that were the case, I was ready for whatever games lay ahead. With my earphones in and lost in thought, I wandered the halls of 1A Heights, scrolling through my phone's limited playlist. I finally settled on 𝐒𝐵𝐵𝐵𝐵𝐵𝐵𝐵𝐵𝐵𝐵𝐵𝐵𝐵𝐵. It wasn't my favorite song, but it helped me focus. School had ended a while ago, yet I still hadn't confronted Kaminari about what had happened at lunch. It had been humiliating. I couldn't believe I had let my guard down long enough for him to kiss me. He had lulled me into a false sense of security before reigniting his old games, and I had to admit it bruised my pride that he could so easily pull the rug out from under me. I felt rusty. Back in the slums, we constantly made bets, challenged each other, and tried to outsmart one another, much to Prism's amusement. I needed to fill her in on the recent developments, which often led to one of us ending up in a compromising situation, sometimes even together. It was all in good fun, a twisted way of seeking each other's attention. I smiled fondly as memories of our antics flooded my mind. Humming along to the music, I unlocked my door, flicked on the lights, and dropped my bag on the floor as soon as I stepped into my room. Shock coursed through me as I surveyed the space. Someone had cleaned my room. Normally, it was cluttered, with unfinished gadgets, plastic water bottles, and overflowing trash. My desk, the only area I kept somewhat tidy, was where I spent most of my time. I instinctively got into a fighting stance, ready to confront whoever had invaded my space. Then, I turned to find Lucifer emerging from behind the curtain that separated my makeshift bathroom, wearing an apron and casual clothes. "Dad," I stammered, though I didn't relax my tense posture. What was he doing here? I hadn't seen him in ages. I scanned him for any signs of danger. He wore worn black jeans, a white t-shirt, and an old red checkered apron. His tousled auburn hair was topped with aviator sunglasses, and his emerald green eyes revealed a mix of emotions I had rarely seen from him. "Hey, Izuku," he said casually, waving his scarred hand and offering a crooked smile that revealed his pointed teeth. "Thank you," I managed to reply, searching for a conversation starter. But the questions swirling in my mind were ones I wasn't ready to ask. For so long, I had believed he was out of the picture, told by my mother that he worked abroad. I never bought that story. Instead, he had been planning a failed uprising that landed him in prison, escaped, allied with the most dangerous being known to man, all for one, and quickly became one of the most wanted villains. Now that our paths had crossed, I was uncertain about how to feel. Deep down, I wanted to rekindle our father-son relationship, but part of me also wanted to confront him and demand answers. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and silence felt like the best option for now. A nervous chuckle broke the stillness, accompanied by tendrils of smoke escaping his mouth. He cleared his throat, preparing to deliver the speech he had rehearsed since arriving an hour earlier. He acknowledged his dual role as a villain and a father, expressing regret for not being present in his son's life since they both discovered each other was still alive. He had decided to spend his free time with his son, whom he had neglected for too long. As he nervously rubbed his neck, the son felt a wave of relief wash over him, grateful that he didn't have to initiate this difficult conversation. He retrieved an old video game console, an Xbox 11, from the top of the cupboard and dusted it off. He had salvaged it from a dump and worked hard to restore it. After plugging everything in, he grabbed the only game he owned, a racing title nearly as old as the console itself, a gift from his father before he was taken away. The father smiled widely, his unnerving grin softened by tears at the corners of his eyes, and pulled his son into a slightly awkward side hug. He declared that the night would begin, and in a quiet voice, he revealed he had dreamed of this moment. The son felt a flutter in his heart, a mix of grief and betrayal, but slowly, the bonds between them began to mend, with hope that they would not break again. Days passed, and the atmosphere grew more intense. The following day marked the start of exams, and the tension in the dorms was palpable. Students studied vigorously, while 𝐒𝐻𝐲 yelled at his peers during tutoring sessions. The son was among those studying, but his focus was on larger concerns rather than schoolwork. The written exam posed no threat, but the practical one did. They would face giant robots like in the entrance exam, but he knew it wouldn't be that simple. This year was different. A villain attack had nearly destroyed the school during the sports festival, and with all might as a teacher, the stakes were higher than ever. Class 1A was under a harsh spotlight, and he suspected the challenges would be more intense than in previous years. With a sigh, he shook his head and returned to studying the hero profiles in front of him, dismissing any distractions. An hour later, a knock echoed through his room. He groaned, not wanting to deal with anyone, and ignored it. The knocking persisted, growing more insistent, and frustration bubbled within him. He leaped from his chair, ready to confront whoever dared disturb him, but paused to take a deep breath. He forced a strained smile, ruffled his hair, and put on a shirt before opening the door, only to find no one there. Annoyed and exhausted, he slammed the door shut and locked it again. As he returned to his desk, ready to resume studying, his chair was suddenly pulled out from under him, and he fell to the ground. What the heck? He turned to see 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽𝐻, the slippery classmate he had been unable to catch all week. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 was back for another round. The son snapped at him, asking what he wanted, not bothering to get up. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽, with a mischievous glint in his eye, revealed he was there to play a game and pulled out a pack of cards from his jacket pocket, smirking as he challenged him. He accepted the challenge and settled onto a nearby cushion. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 dealt the cards and laid out an array of chips, announcing they would play blackjack. The son felt a shiver run down his spine. It was nearly impossible to beat 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 at any card game. While 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 thrived on chance and high stakes, he preferred strategic games. Nevertheless, he was determined not to back down. When 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 proposed a wager, the stakes were raised. The winner would command the loser to do one thing they couldn't refuse. Excitement coursed through him as he nodded in agreement, preparing for a battle he knew he might lose, but he had other plans in mind. As the game progressed, it became increasingly difficult to predict the outcome. After an hour of intense play, he lost. They had been tied, but in the final round he busted. As he admitted defeat, 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽's grin widened, and he braced himself for the inevitable embarrassment. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 teased him about blushing, and he awkwardly replied that he was simply contemplating what 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 might make him do. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 quickly clarified that his intentions were not what the son had assumed. He wanted to know the full truth about why the son was there and to be included in the fun. Denki sat on the bed, giving him that familiar glint in his eyes, the one that appeared whenever he was gambling or plotting a trick. The sun burst out in surprise, realizing what Denki truly wanted to know. Denki nodded, eager for the answer. I thought it would have been a bit more thrilling and intriguing. He shrugged and leaned against the wall. He explained that he was there to dismantle UA from within and to expose what happened behind the scenes. Folding his arms, he gave a coaxing look, insisting that there was much more to the story. Reluctantly, I agreed but warned him to keep quiet about it. He responded with a lip-sealing gesture, and I hoped I wasn't making a mistake. Leaning in closer, I whispered that I was part of the League of Villains. His eyes widened in realization, and he quickly connected the dots, recalling the attacks on them and the exposure of heroes. He jumped to his feet, excitement evident on his face. I chuckled, noting that he had figured it out while the police had not. I guided him toward the door before he could ask more questions. Just before he left, he remarked that I must be glad he wasn't the police. Deciding to seize the moment, I leaned in closer, smirking as I noticed his heart racing, and softly expressed my relief at that fact. I then gave him a gentle kiss before pushing him out the door and quietly closing it, hoping he wouldn't see the blush that I was sure had spread across my face. I murmured that he could join in on the fun, and he eagerly anticipated their plans, his heart racing with adrenaline as he made his way back to his dorm, a smirk on his face. Kaminari strolled back to his dorm room, unconcerned about the cameras or the risk of getting into trouble. He had always enjoyed living on the edge, testing how far he could push things before they broke. Unlocking his door, he entered his chaotic room, replaying the events of the night in his mind. His heart raced, and a wicked grin spread across his face as he thought about how exhilarating it had all been. He appreciated hanging out with Izuku. The green-haired teenager always had something exciting planned, making their time together fun. As he moved around his cluttered dorm room, he ran his fingers through his blonde hair. After finally locating his pajamas in a pile of clothes he had yet to give to Kirishima for washing, he changed and climbed into bed. Staring at the plain white ceiling, his thoughts wandered back to the beginning of their friendship. It had started as a game, a competition between two kids who had formed a tentative bond. He had been the leader, dragging them into schemes and mischief, while Izuku initially served as a scapegoat. However, Izuku quickly became the brains of their operation, and they never got caught after that. The bet they had made to make each other uncomfortable had begun when they were around 12, and he had thought he would win easily, underestimating Izuku's resilience. Their verbal sparring had become a spectacle for the other kids in the slums, with Izuku matching his jabs and often striking soft spots with his words. Kaminari would cry when he lost, but Izuku always apologized afterward. That was when he realized an unexpected attachment was forming. The next morning his alarm blared, and he resisted the urge to throw it against the wall. Reluctantly, he crawled out of bed and staggered to his closet. He mentally prepared for the day ahead, knowing Mina would likely drag everyone to the mall for shopping, which would probably end with a cafe visit and Bakugo tutoring them, more like torturing them, he thought with a roll of his eyes. He dressed in ripped black jeans, a white t-shirt with a lightning bolt, and worn yellow sneakers. He shoved a phone he had borrowed into his pocket, strapped on his grandfather's non-functional brown leather watch, and headed out, doubling back to grab his Rubik's Cube for entertainment. In the common room, only a few people were awake, most still in their pajamas. He didn't bother identifying them, he only cared that Izuku was there. He settled onto the comfortable couch, twirling the cube on his fingers like a basketball. As he solved it one-handed, he reflected on how people were like Rubik's Cubes, mixed up in stereotypes, lies, and truths. Solving one side often revealed that other sides were even more complicated, frustrating those who struggled to understand. Some would give up, satisfied with just one solved side, while a few persevered, determined to complete the cube, even if it meant making a bigger mess in the process. They disrupted the solidity and perfection of what they had created, reversing all their hard work and breaking the bond they had formed. Then there were those who dismantled a Rubik's Cube into little pieces and put it back together however they wanted, lacking the patience to work through it. They just forced it, and more often than not, the Rubik's Cube was never the same. Kaminari enjoyed playing with Rubik's Cubes. He sucked the cube from his right hand to his left, spinning it on his finger before letting it fall on each individual knuckle. He flipped it into the air, caught it, and continued to solve it with one hand. After a while, Bakugo and Kirishima finally arrived, as expected, together. They were not doing a great job of keeping their relationship a secret. Anyone with half a brain could tell they were dating. No one had noticed Kaminari yet, which he appreciated, as it gave him time to get his guard up and put on his mask of Kaminari the idiot. Mina and Shiro then stumbled into the room, dressed but barely awake. Soon they would be off to the mall. Mina dragged them from store to store like a greyhound chasing a rabbit, but this rabbit was pink and running after sales instead. The aroma of buttery popcorn and cinnamon assaulted Kaminari's nose, indicating they had passed the theater. Kaminari wondered where Mina was heading, noting that there weren't any clothing stores down this way. Their ringleader suddenly halted in front of a quaint and modern-looking cafe called Weston's Cafe. It was clearly foreign-owned, with huge, crystal-clear windows that allowed glimpses inside. The light gray walls and forest green oak panel door added to its charm. Delicious smells of cake and apples hit their senses as they entered. Inside, the cafe had a rich color palette of green, brown, and white, which was very pleasing to the eye. It wasn't too formal, but it certainly wasn't tacky. Potted plants adorned the shelves behind the counter, and light bulbs hung uncovered from the gleaming white ceiling, which had a fresh coat of paint. Tables were scattered in the center, and booths in the corners were covered in dark green leather. The group of heroes in training chose to sit at one of the booths. Kaminari sat next to Shiro and Mina, cracking jokes and teasing Bakugo, but secretly admiring the cafe while playing one of Izuku's favorite games, trying to guess why people were there and what their lives might be like. He spotted a woman sitting alone, looking anxious as she tapped her foot and scanned the area, clearly anticipating someone. She was heavily made up, wearing tight jeans and a long-sleeved striped shirt that hugged her figure, topped off with a thin scarf, a loose-knit beanie, and boots to combat the chilly winds. Definitely waiting for a date. The majority of the cafe's patrons were in their teens to late 20s, mostly female, and over 70% were dressed warmly. Kaminari subtly scanned the room for another candidate but was interrupted by Shiro, who was laughing at a guy with toilet paper rolls for hair at the counter. Kaminari joined in, making some light-hearted jokes. They were interrupted by a waitress asking to take their order. Kaminari turned to face her and paused mid-sentence, not for the reason his friends thought. She had light lavender hair in twin plaits that reached just above her waist, and her large caramel eyes shone with anticipation. Her starched white short-sleeved button-up was a size too small and obviously secondhand, with cheap plastic buttons barely holding it together. The dark green pencil skirt she wore was a size too big and faded. Thankfully, she wore thick brown woolen stockings. Over her skirt sat a light brown apron, used to store her notebook and pencil, which also looked a little worn. Her black loafers were scuffed and in need of polishing. Kaminari felt a bit taken aback by her formality. He finally decided on a slice of carrot cake and a chocolate milkshake, opting for the cheaper options on the menu. He noticed her subtly flirting with Bakugo while taking their orders, clearly enamored with the winner of the UA Sports Festival. Bakugo, however, was not interested and ignored her. Eventually, she caught on, her face turning pink with embarrassment as she left the table. Kaminari asked Bakugo why he didn't go for her, noting she was cute and clearly interested. Mina teased him, asking if he was jealous, to which Kaminari firmly replied no. Mina then turned her attention to Bakugo, pressing him about whether he had any special girl in his life. Kirishima raised his hands in surrender, not wanting to get involved. Bakugo grumbled that he couldn't become the top hero with a stupid extra girl holding him back. An idea struck Kaminari, and he teasingly asked if Bakugo was gay. The atmosphere shifted, and everyone else at the table paled. Mina hissed at Kaminari, questioning how he could suggest something like that, her quiet tone barely concealing her disgust. Bakugo snapped back, glaring at Kaminari, his anger hiding a hint of fear. Kirishima stared at Kaminari incredulously, while Kaminari shrugged, feigning innocence. Mina groaned, burying her face in her hands, shaking her head in disbelief. She wondered if Kaminari even understood the law or paid attention in political analysis class. 𝐒𝐿𝐲 grumbled that it just proved they needed more help than he thought as he pulled out his textbooks and notes from his black backpack adorned with a skull. They started off with math, and once they finished that, they would move on to languages, history, and geography, all subjects that most of them struggled with, except for 𝐒𝐿𝐲. Despite his fiery temper and foul attitude, he was very smart and had a pair of nerdy glasses that he refused to wear. But first, it was math. Next came the subject Kaminari passionately disliked, political analysis, which felt like an excuse to shove propaganda down their throats. About halfway through their study session, their food arrived, and it was worth the wait. The whipped cream on top of the slice of cake melted in his mouth. The cake was warm and moist, bursting with the taste of fresh carrots, and every taste bud sang a symphony of delight. It was pure bliss. A single cube of sugar had been a rare treasure in his childhood, something he received only once a year. Sweets and cakes were even less common and felt like a fortune. Kaminari looked at his classmates, who seemed unfazed by the delightful tastes and textures of their dishes, accustomed to such luxuries. He, on the other hand, had been lucky to score some fresh bread. In the slums, they were given the most basic foods: bread, dried or canned meat, and whatever fruits and vegetables they could find, along with boiled water for safety. He scowled at the injustice of it all but quickly masked it with a look of indifference like his classmates and continued eating. By the time they returned to the dorms, the sun was setting, casting an orange and red haze over the school as the last rays of sunlight danced among the trees. It was tranquil and peaceful until the pink-haired, rose-skinned girl called him inside. He complied reluctantly. To his surprise, there weren't groups of people cramming for the upcoming written exams. Instead, everyone was gathered around a small table, eagerly watching as 𝐒𝐿𝐲 and Deku played poker. Kaminari felt his hands twitch. It had been so long since he had gambled, aside from the bets with 𝐒𝐿𝐲. Speaking of 𝐒𝐿𝐲, he had lost miserably, and Kaminari chuckled at Ida, who was trying to comfort him after his drastic loss. Kaminari felt an internal conflict brewing as he watched 𝐒𝐿𝐲 scoff, sitting down to challenge 𝐒𝐿𝐲, his demeanor indicating he had just had an argument with Kirishima. Kaminari's BLD boiled. No one was allowed to be mean to 𝐒𝐿𝐲. 𝐒𝐿𝐲 beat 𝐒𝐿𝐲, who accepted his loss with good humor. Kaminari then asked 𝐒𝐿𝐲 to play, trying to sound as cool as possible as he took a seat across from him. 𝐒𝐿𝐲 jeered, warning him to be prepared to lose. 𝐒𝐿𝐲 stifled a laugh behind his hand, and 𝐒𝐿𝐲 glared at him, ready to shout. Kaminari smirked and picked up a brand new pack of cards that had been mixed up. He shuffled them expertly, laying them out in a swift motion that could easily be missed if one blinked. He counted the chips and handed some to 𝐒𝐿𝐲, his expression serious and challenging. 𝐒𝐿𝐲, now lacking his usual domineering expression, picked up his cards, determined to win. Kaminari felt 𝐒𝐿𝐲's supportive presence behind him, boosting his confidence. It was just like the good old days. Kaminari won that round and continued to defeat every opponent who dared to challenge him. The dreaded week of written exams had begun, and he had spent the previous day training and studying with 𝐒𝐮𝐲, who was preparing for the invitation-only hero course entrance exam. 𝐒𝐮𝐲 had shown him the letter left on his doorstep a week ago, and Kaminari had been excited for both of them, knowing how rare such opportunities were. He had no doubt that 𝐒𝐮𝐲 would succeed, partly due to his skill and partly because Aizawa had taken a liking to him. After all, it wasn't just talent that led to success, but connections as well. As he glanced around the classroom, he noticed everyone was a bundle of nerves, staring at the stack of papers in Aizawa's hands as if they were facing a predator. Those intimidating stacks of paper were for the second language exam, English. In 2 hours, they would be tested on diction, grammar, comprehension, creative writing, and analysis of poems and short stories. He could already feel a headache coming on as he gripped his smart pen tightly. The papers were handed out, and what was dubbed Hell Week began. 9 subjects in 1 week. Even with his smart pen, this would be challenging. To be fair, 9 subjects were nothing compared to the 14 in general studies or the 11 in support classes. When he visited 𝐒𝐮𝐲's dorm, everyone had bags under their eyes, drowning in notes and textbooks. They had to study basic subjects like Japanese, math, English, history, geography, life skills, and the sciences, as well as specialized subjects like hero politics, general politics, quirk analysis, debating and discussions, business studies, dramatic arts, and coding. He felt grateful he wasn't in their position. Turning his attention back to the paper in front of him, he cringed internally. He disliked English and every other subject, really, and just school in general. Biting down on his tongue to suppress a sigh, he began the 6-page nightmare, the thought of burning the school to the ground being the only motivation carrying him through. The week passed in a blur of papers, coffee cups, and frustrations, leading to the practical exams. As he had guessed, they weren't facing robots but their teachers, who were either handicapped or, thankfully, not. His heart raced, and his face flushed with anger as the teams were announced. He was paired with 𝗧𝗧𝗟𝗃. That stubborn firecracker wouldn't cooperate with him if his life depended on it, and to make matters worse, they would be fighting against All Might, which meant 𝗧𝗧𝗟𝗃 would be trying to show off like a child in a playground. He would attempt to confront All Might directly to prove his superiority, disregarding any alternative strategies. Battling to keep emotions in check, the protagonist gritted their teeth and clenched their fists, wishing the intense anger would dissipate. It wasn't working. A quiet voice, almost like a whisper in their mind, urged calmness, sounding suspiciously like Sparky. Turning around, they spotted 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽𝐸, who wore a goofy smile and nodded appreciatively at 𝐻𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐼's hero costume. Was this a figment of their imagination? Ida commanded everyone to line up and board the bus, directing them like a traffic officer. The bus still had that new smell, everything sparkly clean and sleek. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽𝐸, their assigned seat partner, stood behind in line, offering the window seat. He chatted amiably with Kirishima, who had yet to sit down. Aizawa announced that everyone should be seated and refrain from communicating with their exam partners until given time to strategize. Peering out the crystal-clear window, the protagonist tried to clear their mind. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽𝐸 asked if they were all right, and they nodded slowly. The awkward tension returned, and their heart ached with memories of how things used to be. They began to gather their thoughts, mentioning that 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽𝐸 would be facing 𝗎𝐬𝐻. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽𝐸 confirmed this abruptly, brushing off the conversation. The protagonist sighed and inquired about his plan, notebook in hand, ready to brainstorm strategies. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽𝐸 stated he had a plan, but his expression remained relaxed. The protagonist looked at him, silently asking for more details, but he didn't catch the hint. Curious, they prompted him for the plan. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽𝐸 explained that he was paired with Mina, both struggling academically, and facing the principal, one of the smartest beings in Japan. It would be suspicious for the 2 least capable students to defeat him, even if he were handicapped. He declared he would lose in style, striking a ridiculous pose with a goofy grin. Silence fell between them again, more unbearable than before. Frustrated, the protagonist scribbled on a crumpled piece of paper, questioning why he was acting foolishly. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽𝐸 looked confused before taking the pen and writing back, asking why they wanted to know. The protagonist felt a twist in their stomach, realizing the odds of them meeting again were slim. They expressed their curiosity, and 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽𝐸 nodded in understanding before picking up the pen again. The protagonist blushed at the thought of wanting to find him. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽𝐸 mentioned he had heard through the grapevine that the Reaper would be attending the top hero school, which prompted the protagonist's accidental curse, though thankfully, no one noticed. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽𝐸's expression remained blank as he insisted he could be telling the truth. The protagonist retorted, suggesting they could also be a magical girl. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽𝐸 shrugged, implying it reflected how much trust the protagonist had in him. He leaned back, plugging in a pair of old earphones. The protagonist questioned why he wouldn't share anything, and when they mentioned Prism, 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽𝐸 grunted that she wasn't there. The protagonist insisted she was, but before they could explain, Ida ushered everyone off the bus, interrupting them. Once separated into pairs, the teachers led each group to different rooms for planning. In their 10 minutes, the atmosphere was tense, filled with harsh stares and the protagonist being silenced by 𝗧𝗧𝗟𝗘, who growled that he didn't need any plans. The protagonist walked behind him with their head down, stuttering a soft acknowledgement, reminiscent of their childhood. 𝗧𝗧𝗟𝗘 glared and clicked his tongue before dragging the protagonist to the waiting room. Observing the situation, the protagonist noted the lack of explosions, Considering it character development. The first match featured 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 and against ectoplasm. Their teamwork was impressive, and the protagonist wasn't alone in noticing it. Mina muttered about ships and dating, her mind clearly elsewhere. They managed to defeat ectoplasm when Dark Shadow caught him off guard. As the tests progressed, the protagonist discussed strategies with Todoroki. The matches unfolded: 𝗬𝗓𝗏 and 𝐿𝐼𝐼𝐼 versus 𝗬𝗓𝗏 win. Kirishima and Rikido versus 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴𝐵𝐿𝐼 defeat. J.I.R.U and Koda versus Present Mic win. The protagonist smirked, commenting to Todoroki that the students were matched well against teachers, creating a challenging environment. A robotic voice announced the next contestant, and the protagonist waved and smiled as Todoroki entered the elevator. Now came the match they had been anticipating: Todoroki and Momo versus Eraserhead. Momo, intelligent and detail-oriented, often let Todoroki take the lead due to her lack of confidence. Todoroki, reliant on his quirk, struggled physically against their homeroom teacher and wasn't adept at strategy. Their communication faltered, stemming from their backgrounds. Fortunately, they managed to pull through, with Todoroki inspiring Yaoyorozu to regain her confidence, ultimately defeating Aizawa by using his own tactics against him. The protagonist cheered for their classmates, feeling a surge of pride. They did it. Izuku celebrated alongside 𝗬𝗓𝗏, who was jumping up and down with glee. Internally, he smirked as the pieces fell into place. He wondered what Endeavor would do when he used his own weapon against him. An excited giggle escaped him as he anxiously watched the next test, which featured 𝐬𝐶 and Mineta against Midnight. It was bound to be an interesting matchup. Midnight knocked Mineta out with her intoxicating gas. 𝐬𝐶, hiding behind the rocks, cleverly covered his mouth and nose with tape to avoid inhaling it. He swung himself between the peaks of the mountain and cocooned Midnight in tape, blocking her pores and stopping the release of her gas. He then cuffed her, and she admitted defeat. Izuku summarized the events for Todoroki, who was getting patched up by Recovery Girl. Kaminari and Mina faced Principal Nizu and lost, as Sparky had predicted. Ojiro and Ida battled Power Loader and won. Mizo and Toru faced Snipe and also emerged victorious. The robotic voice intoned over the intercom, announcing the next examinees to head to the front gate. Izuku pleaded with Bakugo not to attack All Might, suggesting that avoiding him would be the smarter course of action. Bakugo dismissed him with a command, his stubbornness evident. As they entered the fake cityscape, Izuku resignedly told Bakugo that it would be his funeral and marched off in the opposite direction. Bakugo stared dumbfounded at his retreating figure. Izuku powered up his quirk and leaped away, spotting All Might rushing through the streets, cackling madly. He perched atop a building, waiting for All Might to notice him. When All Might did, he bounded up and attempted to punch Izuku, but Izuku dodged just in time, causing All Might to obliterate the building instead. Izuku wondered if people had been inside and if All Might's strategy would have been any different if their roles were reversed. He doubted it. Catching All Might off guard, Izuku knocked him to the ground, delivering him right to an enraged Bakugo's feet. Activating his analyst quirk, Izuku quickly formulated a plan. It wasn't very heroic, but it was the only way. Before putting it into action, he decided to try one more time to convince Bakugo. Sliding down a flagpole, he sprang to where Bakugo was getting pummeled by All Might. Izuku shouted at Bakugo to stop, insisting he couldn't win like that while keeping his distance. Bakugo yelled back, determined to prove himself, and rushed at All Might, bloodied and with broken arms. Izuku growled, realizing he had given Bakugo his choice. After Bakugo was flung back into a building, Izuku peeled him off the floor and hoisted him onto his back. However, halfway toward the gate, Bakugo stirred awake and, realizing Izuku's plan, struggled against his grip, elbowing him between the ribs and knocking the air out of him. Bakugo screeched that they were not running away like cowardly extras. Izuku picked himself off the floor, a poisonous green energy swirling around him. His anger bubbled over as he rasped that Bakugo didn't understand. He was trying to save him. Izuku lashed out, appearing in front of Bakugo and slapping him across the face, causing him to stumble to the ground. That would leave a mark. Izuku whispered that Bakugo could do as he pleased, just like he always had, before running away. Bakugo growled after him, vowing to prove he was still better and that Izuku was just a mere pebble in his path. All Might then entered the scene, almost crushing Izuku. All Might declared he was there to destroy them all, cackling again. Izuku ducked and dove through alleyways, leaping over roofs as All Might chased him, hurting him away from Bakugo. Cursing and screaming in his head, Izuku realized that only one team member needed to cross the line. With a new plan in mind, he swiftly changed directions and sped toward the gate. Uraraka, watching the scene unfold, wondered what Izuku was doing and why he was abandoning Bakugo. Todoroki explained that it was likely because Bakugo was being stubborn and refusing to listen to reason. Kaminari agreed, calling it the smartest option. Jiru scoffed at Kaminari's comment, but he shrugged it off and walked over to the vending machine, asking Kirishima to spot him some money. The robotic voice announced that Izuku Midoriya and Katsuki Bakugo had passed. Bakugo and All Might stopped fighting, surprised and confused, and turned to see Izuku leaning against the gate. Bakugo propelled himself at Izuku, furious, crossing 100 meters in mere moments. Izuku easily dodged his punch and quickly immobilized him by pinning him to the ground. He hissed into Bakugo's ear that if he wanted an answer, he should ask like a normal person. Bakugo begrudgingly responded. Izuku sighed and loosened his grip around Bakugo's wrists. He scolded Bakugo for being stubborn and refusing to cooperate, insisting that charging in without a plan wouldn't work. Bakugo finally stopped squirming, hopefully listening. All Might stood by, watching without intervening, as Izuku expressed his frustration. Izuku told Bakugo to get off his high horse, reminding him that there was always someone better. He pointed out that having a powerful quirk didn't make someone a hero. If Bakugo didn't fix his attitude and learn to cooperate, he would be abandoned, just as Izuku had done that day. Izuku watched as his words sank in, hoping they would stick this time. All Might, unsure, asked Izuku to get off Bakugo now. Clearly out of his element, he watched as the other students sat up. Before leaving, a final remark was made. A quirk doesn't define a hero, actions do. A discreet look was cast at All Might before calmly walking out toward the bus, where friends eagerly awaited. Hurrying past anxious students, the day most dreaded had arrived. The day exam results would be revealed. The classroom door swung open, and a dash was made to the seat, attempting to tie a tie but failing miserably. The bell rang, bringing a sigh of relief, just in time. Uraraka leaned in, whispering with curiosity about what had happened, causing a flinch at her sudden closeness. A sheepish response followed, mentioning that the alarm hadn't gone off, which made Uraraka giggle at the flushed face, while Ida stared sternly. The impending disciplinary speech was interrupted when Aizawa trudged in, a sleeping bag in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other, wearing a sour expression. Quieting the class with a grumble, he announced that today would be different. Not only would results be revealed, but there would also be a field trip for the rest of the day. A long slurp of coffee was taken from a mug decorated with cute cat scribbles. A longing for coffee arose, but the milk cartons had run out. Sharing from Aizawa seemed unlikely. After finishing his cup, he continued with the announcements, stating that the first 2 lessons would be dedicated to reviewing exams and grades, followed by the distribution of report cards. A stern glare swept over the class, warning against attempts to hide results since copies would be sent to parents and guardians. A nervous murmur erupted, prompting Aizawa to bark for quiet. Ida's hand shot up, and Aizawa acknowledged him. Standing, Ida asked about the field trip. Aizawa leaned back against his desk, revealing that he had just been informed about it that morning, explaining his grouchy demeanor. The class reacted with a mix of emotions, but one student maintained a blank expression, secretly rejoicing. Plans were in motion. Yue was retreating like a delicate snail, and soon, that snail would be stomped on. When the bell rang, Aizawa instructed the class to wait until called over the intercom before checking results on the class board. Climbing into his iconic yellow sleeping bag, he slipped under his desk. A frown crossed the student's face at the outdated method of displaying marks, especially with the advanced technology the school possessed. Efficient ways crossed my mind as I pondered the reasons behind their decision to display everyone's scores for all to see, setting the stage for mockery and pride. For those who excelled, it was a chance to boast, while those who struggled faced disgrace, leading to teasing and bullying. They would be labeled as failures. That was the purpose, to distinguish the powerful from the weak, who were left to toughen up or align themselves with the strong in hopes of gaining some ground. It was disheartening. I muttered to myself that it was to enforce the hierarchy system, gripping my hair and resting my head on my desk. Todoroki's familiar voice broke through my thoughts, concern evident in his tone, which made my stomach twist. He asked if I was all right, and I responded that I had just realized something. When he inquired further, I weighed my options and decided to share a modified truth. I expressed my disdain for a world that publicly displayed our grades, allowing some to become arrogant while others faced humiliation and doubt. It fostered unnecessary competition. Todoroki nodded in understanding. He had previously agreed with my views after taking time to reflect. My heart lifted at having gained another supporter for my cause. When the bell rang and the intercom announced classes 1A and B, I activated my quirk in a split-second decision and raced to be the first to arrive. There they were, the 2 cork notice boards, covered in papers. In Class 1A, Yaoyorozu topped the list, followed by Ida, Bakugo, Tsuyu, Todoroki, Jiraiya, Koda, and Hagakure. I placed 9th. As my gaze traveled down the list, I spotted Kaminari's name in 13th place. He had passed. A smile crept onto my face, pleased that he had done well despite claiming he would intentionally fail. This didn't affect my plans at all. My smile turned mischievous as I noticed who came last, Mineta. I might have had a hand in that. I had taken all his textbooks and burned his notes. I may have even slipped something into his meal the night before to ensure he didn't get any sleep. No one could prove he had been sabotaged, and who would believe the words of a perverted failure with a restraining order against him? Certainly not the teachers. Next to his name was a stamp declaring his expulsion from UA. Perhaps this would encourage him to change and strive to improve. But I doubted it. Then I looked at the overall first-year marks. Yaoyorozu was first, a girl from Class B named Kendo was second, and Mei Hatsum was third. As I scanned the list for his name, I didn't care about my own placement as long as I hadn't failed, which I hadn't. There he was. Shinso Hitoshi placed 10th overall in the grade, just enough for him to move up. With Mineta facing expulsion, a spot opened up in Class 1A, significantly increasing Shinso's chances of joining. Congratulated himself, feeling like a genius for the opportunity this presented. After checking the regular classes, he hesitated before looking at the special classes list. Shinso, along with a few others, had taken an unknown hero exam and a specialized test, details of which were shrouded in rumors. Only 5 out of 20 had passed, meeting the obscure requirements, and Shinso had placed third. Aizawa's support solidified his chances of entering Class 1A. His plan was coming together. He imagined declaring victory to Nizu, picturing the chaos that would ensue as his precious school faced turmoil. After a brief moment of excitement, he reminded himself to keep an eye on the teachers through the cameras, aware that there was still a slim chance Shinso might not get in. He needed to check the latest footage from that morning. Slipping away from the crowded notice board, he opened his phone to access the camera app, which stored data from the surveillance devices. To his dismay, he found only static and flashing words, no connection. The camera had been discovered, which explained the unexpected field trip. They would be sweeping the school for bugs and hidden cameras, searching classrooms and dorms. Frustration bubbled within him as he cursed under his breath, feeling the pressure rise. He needed to remove as many bugs as possible, wipe his computer clean, and transfer everything to a flash drive to send back to the bar. It was a daunting task with little time. Reluctantly, he acknowledged that he needed help. Determined, he decided it was time to stop procrastinating and reach out to his friends. The entire grade had gathered, eagerly pushing to see their marks, with cheers and groans echoing through the hallways. He slipped into the shadows, avoiding the chaotic crowd that had doubled in size. Unable to reach Sparky or Prism through the throng, he sent them a message, feeling relief as they checked their phones. He made his way to the roof, unseen, passing outdated cameras that weren't prioritized in the school budget. He climbed the stairs and ducked under the yellow tape, ignoring the "Do Not Enter" signs as he opened the door, which protested with a squeak. Stepping onto the roof, he surveyed the area, noting piles of unused roof tiles, buckets of waterproof paint, and a small shed surrounded by solar panels, housing a noisy generator. Leaning against the shed, he waited impatiently. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴 arrived first, looking curious and slightly concerned. He asked if he was in trouble, his playful demeanor contrasting with his words. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴 explained that he would clarify the information he had shared on the bus, enjoying the confusion on 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴's face. Just then, Prism hurried through the door, and 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴 quickly donned his mask, surprised to see her. Prism inquired about their gathering, sniffing for gossip. They engaged in light banter, and 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴 couldn't help but laugh at their antics. He then urged them to drop the act, revealing he had something important to discuss. The atmosphere shifted as they reacted in shock, their voices rising in unison. Sparky sat down, stunned, while Prism expressed her frustration over not knowing Sparky was alive. She glared at 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴, her emotions evident as her quirk caused her eyes to flash with various colors. As she prepared to confront him, he raised his hands in defense, pleading for her to wait. He promised they could settle things later but emphasized that he needed their help urgently. His sincere expression caused her to hesitate, and she eventually lowered her fists. They agreed to listen, though 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴's bottled-up frustration hinted at an impending explosion of emotions. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴 explained the situation, detailing the school's plan to sweep for bugs and hidden cameras. He emphasized the importance of keeping his operations under wraps, framing it as a matter of their shared interests and goals. After a moment of hesitation, 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴 reluctantly agreed, expressing his frustration like a child forced to do homework. Prism asked what they needed to do, and I cringed at the code name, preferring it when Sparky used it. I instructed Toru to use his undetectable mode to clear out all the devices in the common rooms, staff rooms, and even one hidden under 𝐒𝐻𝐵's office door. I wished Twice were around or that May had finished her copying device. I then directed 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴 to insert a virus into as many security cameras as possible, using his electricity to scramble and wipe the cameras and bugs marked on the map I provided. I reminded them to be discreet and not get caught, emphasizing the urgency of planting the devices in someone else's belongings, preferably a teacher's. Handing them both a pair of LTX gloves and giving Sparky a black USB stick, I smiled as Prism turned him invisible with a kiss on the cheek. They sped off like ninjas to their designated areas, and I whispered a wish of good luck after them. Pulling out my mini laptop, I transferred everything onto a USB, taking 10 minutes. Then, using a Blaze Corporation program, I wiped as much evidence as I could from the hacked cameras, spending another 40 minutes on that task. In a last-minute effort, I searched for any information about the field trip, but after 5 minutes of frantic scanning, I found nothing. Frustrated, I slammed my laptop closed, feeling like tossing it off the roof. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch and the conclusion of the seniors' exams, which had started later due to their longer material coverage. I rushed down the stairs, ignoring my complaining stomach, and made it to class just a couple of minutes late. Aizawa was absent, and I noticed the worried looks from my friends as I plopped down in my chair, scanning the papers in front of me. A hurriedly scrawled note taped to the second page caught my eye, along with folded maps tucked beneath a pile of exam papers. The note informed me that they had done as much as they could but hadn't had time to plant the devices. I let out a sigh of half-hearted relief, masking my true feelings as I pretended to be relieved about a question I had answered correctly. Now, all I could do was wait. I sat quietly on the bus next to Uraraka, who was dozing off on Ida's shoulder. I stared longingly out the window, trying to recognize anything while listening to the conversations around me. Many were discussing the surprise field trip. Eventually, I focused on one voice I wanted to hear, tuning out the rest. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴 was teased by Mina for snacks, and he playfully responded, prompting her to snatch a bag of chips and stick her tongue out at him. Siro joined in, questioning 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴 about his love life, but he insisted there was no one special. Mina, with a mischievous glint in her eye, pressed him further, but he dismissed her teasing. I stopped paying attention, glancing over at the two sleeping teenagers and reflecting on my past. I wondered what would have happened if the League hadn't saved me from that dark place. As we sped past factories, fields, and garbage dumps, a sense of familiarity washed over me. My heart raced when I spotted a rusting sign with missing letters confirming my fears. Welcome to 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴. Panic set in as we drove deeper into the shanty town, the roads becoming narrower. My classmates murmured in confusion, shocked by the poverty surrounding us, thin children, ragged people sleeping on the streets, and others peeking out from their shacks at the unfamiliar bus. I swallowed hard, forcing down the rising bile as the bus stopped at a rusty metal gate, towering 5 meters.